Good morning, everyone,
Good morning.
and welcome to our Friday edition of the EQC meeting for the first day of October 2021. We will reconvene the meeting at 9:33, and we're glad for all those folks who can join us. So our first item today is our general public forum. And this is an opportunity to, receive input about really any topic that comes before DEQ and the EQC that the public wants to talk to us about. And it's our opportunity to hear what is on your minds and what you want us to be thinking about as we continue our work together. So Stephanie, you usually have an orientation to help people know how they can participate and how they can sign up to talk.
Yes, and thank you, Chair George. This is Stephanie Caldera, EQC assistant. I apologize. I typically have a slide with these instructions. I neglected to get that ready this morning. But if people would like to present comment during public forum, please use the raise hand function that's in your reactions panel. If you are connected by phone, please press *9. That will do the same. And Chair George, it will be just a moment while I note the folks who have raised their hands, and then I will let you know how many people we have so far signed up to comment.
Sounds good.
And at this time, Chair George, I see about 11 hands up for folks who have requested to speak. I do have the prompting slides available today, Chair George. Typically, we allocate 3 minutes for people to comment. We have 1 hour scheduled for this item today.
Okay. I think that sounds reasonable unless anybody sees otherwise. Why don't we go ahead and get started? We'll just remind everyone to please introduce yourself as you begin your comments for the record, and Stephanie's slides usually remind you to do that. And we also ask everybody to go ahead and respect the 3-minute time frame. We really do want to hear from as many people as we can, and showing each other the courtesy of respecting that time frame allows us to hear from as many people as possible. So we're so glad that you've chosen to spend your time with us this morning and share your thoughts with us. So with that, we'll go ahead and get underway.
And thank you, Chair George. This is Stephanie Caldera, your commission assistant. The first person I have in my speakers list is Mary Pivato, and you may begin.
Well, thank you very much for this opportunity to testify today. And I appreciate Chair George, Vice Chair Barrasso, and the members of the commission taking the time to listen to the public comment. I am here to comment in support of the proposed 2021 clean truck rules. My name is Mary Pivato, and I'm the Executive Director of Neighbors for Clean Air. The adoption of the California Advanced Truck Clean Rules and Low NOx rules will have a profound positive impact on the health of and well-being of Oregon residents. Exposure to diesel exhaust is a significant public health threat. I think you have already heard much testimony about that, but I want to put a finer point on that the levels of diesel pollution in Oregon result in significant public health impacts that cost the state money. A snapshot of the annual impacts include over 400 premature deaths, over 140 non-fatal heart attacks, and over 25,000 work lost days. The monetized value of health impacts in Oregon exceeds $3 billion annually. So it was presumably this significant public health cost that compelled the Oregon State Legislature in 2007 to direct the Environmental Quality Commission in statute, ORS 468A-793, to establish a goal to reduce excess lifetime risk of cancer due to exposure to diesel engine emissions to no more than 1 case per million individuals by 2017. Despite this clear mandate for a specific outcome, the state's efforts to date have been negligible. In fact, in a 2018 report to this commission, DEQ staff noted diesel emissions impacts to human health and the environment are not being adequately addressed by the DEQ or through toxics reduction strategy planning. The same report went on to say about the Oregon goal, now set 15 years ago to reduce diesel pollution, so to bring cancer risk below 1 in a million. Today, we have reduced less than 2% of the pollution we would need to meet that health standard. So we understand as advocates that diesel emissions from a wide range of sources and operate within a complex regulatory environment, which leaves the state with fewer options to take action. We know that when our neighboring states, such as California, which originally authored these truck rules, takes more aggressive action to eliminate the use of older diesel equipment, Oregon becomes the potential dumping ground if it fails to keep pace. These rules offer a significant opportunity for our state, make real progress on the statutory obligation, and take action upstream towards this goal to ensure that trucks, especially those being replaced by HB 2007, doesn't further perpetuate the problem. Thank you for this opportunity to testify.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is David De La Torre.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is David De La Torre, he, him, él, and I am the Healthy Climate Program Director for Oregon PSR. Oregon Physician, or PSR, is short for Oregon Physicians for Social Responsibility. It's a statewide organization of more than 2,000 health professionals and public health advocates. Guided by the values and expertise of medicine and public health, OPSR has been working to protect public health from environmental degradation for nearly 40 years. OPSR has a strong history of advocating for cleaner and reducing the environmental and public health burdens caused by diesel pollution, and we're proud to add our support for the advanced clean trucks and low NOx omnibus rules to our history of advocacy in Oregon. According to an independent study commissioned by the Natural Resource Defense Council and the Union of Concerned Scientists, medium and heavy duty trucks are responsible for 70% of Oregon's NOx emissions and 64% of Oregon's particulate matter pollution. These two regulations are an opportunity to address this disproportionate pollution burden, protect public health, and increase the standard of living for all Oregonians. According to the World Health Organization, particulate matter from diesel exhaust in outdoor environments negatively impacts more communities than any other pollutant. Particulate matter from diesel exhaust can act as a carcinogen, asthma trigger, and contribute to cardiovascular, cerebrovascular, neurodevelopmental, and pulmonary disorders. Tens of thousands of Americans die prematurely annually because of exposure to diesel particulate pollution. Children, the elderly, and Oregonians living with pre-existing pulmonary conditions are particularly vulnerable. Therefore, we urge the EQC to adopt the advanced clean trucks and low NOx omnibus rules, both of which together can be instrumental in alleviating this environmental and public health burden from Oregonians. Thank you for your advocacy and opportunity to comment.
Thank you.
And thank you. Our next commenter has a display name of Paycar.
Welcome.
Hi, good morning. All right. Yes, good morning, Chair George, Vice Chair Brasso, and Commissioner Cobb. My name is Victoria Paycar, and I'm the Oregon Transportation Policy at Climate Solutions. And I'm here this morning to testify in support of the clean truck rules. I'm here on behalf of both Climate Solutions and the Clean Air Healthy Communities Coalition, which is a growing coalition made up of multi-sector advocates with the goal of reducing public health impacts on Oregonians, ensuring Oregon achieves its greenhouse gas reduction targets in the transportation sector, and supporting a just transition. And before I begin my testimony, I'd also like to mention that last week our coalition submitted a support letter from over 30 organizations that are in support of the EQC passing the proposed clean truck rules by the end of the year. And the link to that letter is also included in our coalition's written comments that we submitted yesterday as well. With that said, like many others here today that have spoken and that will speak, we have been testifying for the EQC to adopt the clean truck rules by the end of this year. And your commission has the power and authority to make a difference and ensure that Oregon is doing everything we can to be part of the solution to improve public health and reduce transportation-related greenhouse gas emissions and pollution. And Governor Brown signed on to the medium heavy-duty MOU last year with 14 other states who want to lead the way on the transition to zero-emission medium heavy-duty vehicles. And so now is the great time for the EQC to help Oregon make the governor's commitment a reality. And the advanced clean truck rule and the low NOx rules should be passed together in this rulemaking to ensure that these complementary rules can jumpstart the zero emission medium heavy duty vehicle market while curbing toxic diesel pollution from the continued sale of new diesel engines as well. We can't afford to delay or postpone the adoption of both rules, especially the low NOx omnibus rule, given the tremendous public health benefits it will bring to Oregonians disproportionately burdened by air pollution. The clean truck rules are a start to the important work we must continue pushing forward to transform our transportation sector, to respond to the climate crisis, to respond to Oregon's air pollution problem, and ensure we are getting there justly by supporting worker protections as well. So thank you so much for your time and consideration and comments.
Thank you.
Our next commenter is Noah B. Howe.
Good morning. Thank you. My name is Noah B. Howe, and I'm the manager on the transportation team at Ceres. I'm here today to comment in support of the 2021 Clean Truck Rules. Ceres organizes the Business for Innovative Climate and Energy Policy Network, or BICEP, a coalition of over 70 major businesses, including a number of health systems, many of whom have substantial operations or are headquartered in Oregon. We also coordinate the Ceres Investor Network, which includes 175 members with collectively nearly $30 trillion in assets under management. We also run the Corporate Electric Vehicle Alliance, a collaboration of 24 companies, including Amazon, DHL, IKEA, and others looking to completely decarbonize and electrify their fleets. Our companies and investors see climate change as a significant risk and reducing greenhouse gases as an economic opportunity. We strongly support Oregon adopting the Advanced Clean Truck Rule and HDO low NOx rules and see this as the first of many steps Oregon should take to reduce transportation emissions. As you know, medium and heavy duty vehicles are a major driver of emissions, and transportation emissions disproportionately impact low income and communities of color. Transportation is also a major cost center for companies. Our Corporate Electric Vehicle Alliance is growing, and companies are investing in electrification because transitioning to EVs can generate cost savings over the life of a vehicle. From the ACT and low NOx omnibus rule, which you are considering now, to the Advanced Clean Fleet rule, we need strong policies to coordinate industry leaders and stakeholders, increase access to zero emission vehicles, unlock cost savings and benefits, and drive market transformation at a pace and scale the private sector cannot achieve on its own. Our companies support electrification of the commercial, medium, and heavy-duty transportation sector because it will support a cleaner, more energy-efficient economy in Oregon. These rules will drive local innovation and investment in clean technology development and manufacturing, creating new jobs, driving long-term cost savings in company value chains, mitigating climate risks, improving public health, and reducing healthcare costs. Increased access to cost-effective, zero-emission commercial transportation options helps businesses stay competitive in a market where their customers, investors, patients, students, and employees increasingly expect them to lead on sustainability. These rules will accelerate the cost-effective deployment of electric, medium, and heavy-duty vehicles, allow our members to meet financial and climate goals, and significantly reduce air pollution-related health impacts and costs across Oregon. We applaud Oregon for taking this step and look forward to working with you to continue your ambition in reducing transportation emissions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you. Our next speaker is Diane.
Well, good morning. My name is Diane Benson, and I live in Columbia County, Scappoose, Rainier, Clatskanie areas. My topic today, to go along with everyone else's, is of course, our health issues with all the different varieties of pollution. My focus is going to be basically our air pollution with our chemtrails, our geoengineering, which allows to have billions and billions of sprays and contaminants 24 hours a day, 365 days a year of air pollution, which does in fact come down to our planet. We have a very, very large problem with our QVC radiation, our methane problems due to very, very large loads of passenger airlines, helicopters releasing aluminum, manganese, and now graphene, excuse me, in our air. I am a at-large community member of Cherokee Nation. I'm a tribal member, and my large focus of everyday life is to enjoy our forests, our wildlife, share with my grandchildren. And I'm very, very concerned with the depletion of our insect life, wildlife, quality of our water due to the heavy metal overloads that are released from the sky down into our flying wildlife. Our insects have decreased in population with our butterflies, our native bees. 75% over the last 27 years, our flying insect biomass in protected areas has declined due to our air pollution. And our air pollution is not just from our corporations, our fossil fuels, our transportation. We have transportation in the sky that is over each one of us every second of our day that creates huge, huge, huge mass quantities of poison, pollution that each one of us is ingesting every single day that creates huge amount of heavy metal overloads within our whole bodies, which over time increases into neurological depreciation of our health problems. So we need to really plug into our geoengineering. We need to pay attention to over the skies and understand that our forest fires, our drinking water, our wildlife is due to be totally decreased by the era of 2025 if we're not focusing on our geoengineering, which is our climate. It reaches our climate, the earth that we walk on. So if this commission would understand and assist with geoengineering and our pollutions in our sky, that would be greatly appreciated. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Our next commenter is Nora After.
Good morning, Chair George, Vice Chair Barrasso. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today in support of the clean truck rules. Again, my name is Nora After, and I'm the Climate Program Director for the Oregon Environmental Council. OEC has been working on diesel policy for years, including the passage of SB 1008 in 2017, directing VW funds to start upgrading school buses, and HB 2007 in 2019 to complete the VW funds use and start upgrading the oldest truck engines. Today, we're focused on the opportunity that Oregon has to take health and climate action by adopting the Clean Trucks Rule. We will not achieve Oregon's climate pollution reduction goals without making bold changes to the status quo. Addressing the transportation sector, in particular, medium and heavy duty vehicles, is critical to achieving those goals. Trucks, buses, and vans only comprise 10% of all vehicles on the road in the US, but are responsible for nearly a quarter of total climate pollution from transportation and 45% of smog or NOx emissions. A recent independent study by MJ Bradley and Associates found that adopting the ACT and heavy duty omnibus rules in Oregon would reduce greenhouse gas emissions from trucks and buses by 50 million metric tons. EO 2004 called upon DEQ to exercise all available authority to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and these rules are an essential step in doing so. The proposed clean truck rules build on DEQ's past and ongoing diesel work and would make a real difference in Oregon communities now and into the future. We urge you to move forward decisively to adopt these rules this year to continue moving Oregon toward a diesel-free future. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Mark Quaid.
Hi, my name is Mark Quaid. I'm a resident in Portland in the Pearl District. Okay. So my point I'd like to make today is in relation to energy prices for residents of Oregon. The one thing I've noticed since I moved here 2 years ago, or I noticed 2 years ago when I did move here, when signing up for energy to our apartment, that the PG company, there was a charge for Green Future Choice, which I was really surprised with, that as a resident, by going to pick the Green Choice option, that there was a charge, which I obviously I'm okay to pay. But as I thought about that more, that will be a total disincentivizer for the rest, for most people. And 2 years later, it's still there as a charge for people that want to take the green option. And it kind of ties into the conversations yesterday around the climate protection program and incentivization and regulation. And I would like the EQC to consider how those regulations can disincentivize energy companies from going that route of basically disincentivizing customers to pick a clean energy choice. For me, the issue outlawed are the subsidies are directed in such a way that people have an incentivization to pick renewable, and that they as in there's a deduction for picking renewable, not a charge. And then leading on from that, the other point I'd like to make is, as a resident, for my Oregon tax dollars or my federal, I have no idea if they're being used. I'm sure they're being used as subsidies somewhere, which is great, but I have no way of knowing if those subsidies are being directed to, from an energy perspective, being directed to fossil fuel industry subsidies or to renewable energy subsidies. So again, my ask on EQC is, particularly with Oregon taxes, because they're clearly within our control, is to have regulation that directs subsidies, that our taxes don't go to subsidies for fossil fuel industries. They're the 2 points I'd like to make. Thank you for the time and opportunity today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next commenter is Kara Saylor.
Chair George and commissioners, thank you for allowing an opportunity to hear from the public this morning. I'm here to testify in favor of the advanced clean truck rule and the low NOx rule. My name is Kara Saylor. I'm with the Green Energy Institute at Lewis and Clark Law School. Our mission is to develop smart and comprehensive legal and policy strategies to address climate change and support a swift and equitable transition to a sustainable carbon-free energy grid. That's one of the reasons I'm testifying today. The advanced clean truck rule and heavy-duty low NOx rule are smart policies. The other reason I'm here is that I'm a mother of 2. I have an obligation to do everything in my power to urge you, as the policymakers with the power to do the right thing, to choose ambition. So I highlight only 2 of the many reasons that you should adopt these rules. First, I know you have patiently listened to hours and hours of testimony, and that the vast majority of that testimony yesterday urged you to take action to address climate change. You probably already know that global average temperatures have increased by about 1 degree Celsius, and we have all experienced the impacts of those increases through wildfires, heat waves, and droughts here in Oregon. We need to try to keep temperature increases to 1.5 degrees Celsius ideally, or at most 2 degrees Celsius by the end of the century to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. Adopting these rules will get Oregon on a path to achieve its greenhouse gas reduction goals by beginning to address transportation emissions and black carbon while reducing other harmful emissions. Second, this policy is right for Oregon's economic future. We must do all we can to accelerate and inspire the transition from diesel trucks to zero-emission electric vehicles. Please provide this important direction to the market. These rules will spur investments in the state, create jobs, result in business savings, not to mention provide those important health benefits so many this morning have spoken eloquently about. Positioned between two states taking ambitious climate action means that it is especially important that you make sure Oregon isn't left behind. Thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you.
Chair George, our next speaker is Andy Wonder.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to comment today. My name is Andy Wonder, and I lead policy for E2 in Oregon. I am here on behalf of E2's network of nearly 500 business leaders in Oregon to express the business community's strong support for Oregon's adoption of the Advanced Clean Truck Rule and Heavy Duty Omnibus Rule in 2021. E2 is a national nonpartisan group of business leaders, investors, and other professionals from every sector of the economy who advocate for smart policies that are good for the economy and good for the environment. Deploying zero-emission vehicles is an economic opportunity, and passing the ACT and HDO rules would send powerful market signals to advance to continue zero-emission investment and innovation by vehicle manufacturers and expand Oregon's growing clean truck sector. A recent analysis produced by MJ Bradley illustrates the economic development opportunity presented by adoption and found that these two rules can unlock over $2 billion in public and private investment in charging infrastructure through 2050. Furthermore, utility net revenue from increased electricity sales from the ACT rule alone is projected to be about $128 million by 2050. These savings would be passed directly to Oregon customers, resulting in reduced utility bills with annual savings of $70 per household and $410 per business per year by 2050. And electric trucks are also less expensive to service, maintain, and fuel over the lifetime of the vehicle, providing significant long-term cost savings to Oregon's business and fleet managers. In fact, by 2050, total savings for the owner of a zero emissions truck or bus over its lifetime is expected to be $60,000 on average. This money is reinvested into the economy via consumer spending and investment by business. In sum, adoption of the Advanced Clean Truck Rule and Heavy Duty Omnibus Rule provides an opportunity for Oregon to drive economic development and ensure the state meets its climate and clean energy goals. These rules are indeed good for Oregon's economy and environment. Thank you for the opportunity to comment today.
Thank you.
Our next commenter is Patricia Portillo.
Hi, thank you for the opportunity to provide comments today. My name is Patricia Portillo, and I'm a transportation analyst at the Natural Resources Defense Council. I'd like to talk about the 2021 Clean Truck Rule proposal put forth by DEQ. As you've heard from many others already, the two rules under consideration, the Advanced Clean Trucks and the Heavy Duty Omnibus Rule, are absolutely critical complementary regulations that will accelerate the transition to clean zero-emission vehicles while significantly reducing harmful air pollution and greenhouse gas emissions from fossil fuel trucks. These rules, which are requirements on large truck manufacturers, not on fleets, have clear public health, climate, and economic benefits. Since others have already touched a lot on these benefits, I want to focus instead on the imperative of adopting these rules without delay. Because of mandatory 2-year lead time requirements from adoption to implementation, adopting these rules in 2021 will help Oregon avoid missing compliance years and help the state ease into the regulations, which begin with fairly low requirements but ramp up over time. Now, zero emission technology for trucks and buses, it's here today. Currently, there are 30 companies offering at least one medium and heavy duty zero emission vehicle for sale commercially, covering every class of truck. And this will continue to grow to at least 40 by 2025 when implementation begins. Commercial zero emission vehicle offerings today are capable of supporting the vast majority of truck operations, and rapid technological progress is unlocking electrification of even the most demanding duty cycles. Adopting the Advanced Clean Truck Rule and the Heavy Duty Omnibus Rule will act as an accelerator to increase the supply of clean and zero emission vehicle, medium and heavy duty vehicles, helping them achieve economies of scale from higher production volumes, lower costs, and encourage solutions to increase demand and capture significant savings. The sooner Oregon adopts these rules, the sooner their sweeping benefits can come to the state. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Chair George, our next commenter is Akash.
Good morning, Chair George, Vice Chair Barrasso. My name is Akash Singh, and I am the Western States Policy Advocate at the Union of Concerned Scientists, an organization dedicated to advancing science-centric climate policies. Thank you so much for the opportunity to comment in support of the Clean Trucks rules. Vehicular diesel pollution has and is having a devastating effect on the health and lived environments of all Oregonians, with a disproportionate burden borne by low-income Oregonians and Oregonians of color. I speak in advance of these rules, which are a social and economic opportunity to build a future where Oregonians can not only live, but also thrive. Decades of research have been upheld by an independent study commissioned by UCS and NRDC. Oregon has 380,500 medium and heavy duty trucks that are responsible for 9.3 million metric tons of annual greenhouse gas emissions, 70% of Oregon's NOx emissions, and 64% of Oregon's particulate matter emissions. The cost to the public health of Oregonians needs to be a critical component of climate policy conversations. Exposure to particulate matter pollution can cause and or contribute to heart attacks, irregular heartbeats, increase asthma severity, impair proper lung function, aggravate respiratory problems, and induce premature fatalities in people with pre-existing cardiovascular and or pulmonary conditions. Children and adults with pre-existing cardiovascular and or pulmonary conditions are particularly at risk, including the elderly. Diesel exhaust is particularly harmful as it contains about 40 organic compounds that are highly carcinogenic. Adopting these two rules can also provide over $1.8 billion in cumulative public health cost savings for Oregonians, an estimated $2 billion in net annual social benefits, save over $112 million on annual electricity bills for Oregonians, increase Oregon's GDP by approximately $79 million by 2035, save medium and heavy duty truck fleets $1.1 billion, and cut Oregon's greenhouse gas emissions from trucks in half by 2050. I urge the EQC to vote yes on these rules. The time for climate action is now. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Hugh Lay.
Thank you to the DEQ for this proposed regulation and the EQC for the opportunity to testify. My name is Hugh Lay, and I'm testifying on behalf of the Sierra Club. We represent over 73,000 members and supporters here in Oregon and over 4 million across the country. We express our strong support for the Advanced Clean Truck and the Heavy Duty Omnibus Rule. Later today, we'll be submitting comments to the docket, including 600 comments from our Oregon members. When people speak about how the climate crisis will impact future generations, the reality is that we're experiencing the impacts of the climate crisis now. It is clear that Oregon needs to take immediate action this year to clamp down on climate-driven emissions, the largest source of which is from our transportation sector, contributing to 40% of the state's total emissions. Scientists and activists have told policymakers for years that it is time to act on climate. Action is needed now. Electrifying freight is a major environmental justice issue, and no community in Oregon deserves to be a sacrifice zone for the movement of goods. There are approximately 4 million total vehicles on the road in Oregon, 200,000 of which are medium and heavy duty trucks and buses that produce dangerous air pollutants that harm the health of our communities, especially frontline communities of color. And here's a shocking reality. Although these medium and heavy duty vehicles account for only 5% of all vehicles on the road in Oregon, they're responsible for the bulk of toxic air pollution. 49% of nitrogen oxide emissions and nearly 50% of the particulate matter produced by the entire transportation sector. This has resulted in approximately 170 deaths, 145 heart attacks, and 25,000 lost work days annually. Oregon has the opportunity to address this. The Sierra Club strongly supports and urges the EQC to adopt the Advanced Clean Trucks Rule and the Heavy Duty Omnibus Rule. And we ask that you seek to adopt the rule this year and reject any invitations to delay adoption. Waiting to adopt the ACT post-2021 means Oregon will lose additional years of needed compliance. We cannot afford to do that. We need to accelerate electric truck adoption and reduce criteria pollutants like nitrogen oxide and particulate matter now. There is no time to waste. Thank you so much for your time and consideration, and I look forward to ongoing collaboration and discussion on this important issue. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next commenter has a display name NAACP Eugene Springfield.
Thank you. Dear Chair George, Vice Chair Basaro, and members of the commission, thank you for the opportunity to testify this morning. For the record, my name is Eme Okotia Oyekon, and I'm the Environmental and Climate Justice Coordinator for the Eugene Springfield NAACP unit. I'm calling in to testify in support of the adoption of the Advanced Clean Truck Rules and the Low NOx Omnibus Rules for the following reasons. First, we know that because of public policies like redlining, followed by biased urban renewal policies and inner city highway construction, we now have environmental justice communities surrounding by major highways and industries where they are disproportionately burdened by diesel pollution. The evidence of this spatial inequality can be seen in the communities located in West Eugene's industrial corridor, where their homes, schools, daycares, and parks are located next to major highways, rail corridors, and polluting facilities like Highway 99, the Union Pacific Rail Yard, and J.H. Baxter, a chemical and wood treatment facility. There is also a higher percentage of low-income residents and minority residents, unacceptably high rates of self-reported childhood asthma, and less access to educational materials and public decision-making processes. The adoption of the Clean Truck Rules will be a bold step to secure public health and environmental protections for communities like the ones in West Eugene. Secondly, these rules are directly address the goals of my organization's National Environmental and Climate Justice Program by reducing harmful greenhouse gas emissions from trucks by nearly 50 million metric tons, by facilitating the transition to clean energy by requiring truck manufacturers to increase their sale of zero-emission trucks, and promoting livability and resilience in impacted communities by alleviating air pollution disparities and preventing nearly 84,000 respiratory illnesses. Thirdly, SCR 17, the Environmental Justice Framework for Oregon adopted earlier this year, states that all state agencies are responsible to respond to the health, environmental, economic, and climate crisis we face, and that Oregon will address environmental pollution on the basis of the right of all people to clean air. I urge the commission to use your authority to secure the adoption of the Clean Truck Rules as soon as possible and realize the vision for environmental justice set forth by the state of Oregon. Finally, I'll close by emphasizing that we cannot engage in work that creates solutions here on the ground at the expense of people of color and low-income communities elsewhere. I implore the commission to broaden your scope and consider the environmental, public health, and labor protections that needs to be put in place along the length of the green energy supply chain. In this way, we can ensure that the adoption of clean trucks is based on mutual respect and justice for all peoples, a core tenet of environmental justice established by the first National People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit held nearly 30 years ago this very month. Thank you so much for your advocacy, and thank you for the opportunity to testify this morning.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts with us.
Thank you. Our next speaker, Chair George, I have 3 hands remaining, and the next name I have in the list is Julia DeGraw.
All right. Excuse me. Chair George and Barrasso and members of the committee, thank you so much for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Julia DeGraw, and I'm the Coalition Director for the Oregon League of Conservation Voters. And part of my role at OLCV is directing the Oregon Conservation Network, or OCN. OLCV works to demand clean air and water, healthy forests and wildlife, and a renewable energy future for all Oregonians. And OCN, which is coordinated through OLCV, is a coalition of 35 not-for-profit organizations throughout the state, united to advocate for strong environmental policies and fight those that threaten our state's natural legacy. And we represent together thousands of Oregonians from across the state. I'll keep my testimony brief today as to avoid repeating the important and incredibly well-researched testimony from all of our partners and allies testifying today. I am here to testify in support of the Clean Truck Rules and the Advanced Clean Truck and Heavy Duty Omnibus, or Low NOx Rule. We agree with our partners and allies that these rules must be adopted simultaneously to maximize public health and environmental benefits. Addressing greenhouse gas emissions in transportation is crucial to meeting our goals on greenhouse gas reduction. Urgent action, as you all know, is required at this time to address the climate change crisis. And we consider the Clean Truck and Low NOx rules as an important step toward those goals. Thank you so much for the time to testify today. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
And thank you, Chair George. The next name I have in the speakers list is Catherine Thomason.
Thank you. Dear members of the commission, my name is Catherine Thomason. I'm the chair of the Environmental Caucus of the Democratic Party of Oregon. As an owner of an electric vehicle and as a physician, I'm delighted to speak in favor of the proposed clean truck rules that model California's Air Resources Board's rules. It's important to provide a similar position in the regulatory space so that we don't get highly polluting buses and trucks sold in our state. And it keeps the regulations equal across interstate boundaries. I would like to point out that a recent bipartisan survey shows that a significant majority of Oregonians want air and climate pollutants to be regulated. The recently released report, Oregon Clean Trucks Program report, shows that clean truck rules would markedly improve our air quality, saving lives and public health expenditures. The advanced clean truck rule will ensure more zero emission vehicles are being available for sale in Oregon, and the NOx rule will reduce emissions from new fossil fuel vehicles that continue to be sold. I am hopeful that these rules will be yet another spur to our school systems and transit systems to invest in electric buses to clean the air for our children, the most impacted due to their vulnerability. The higher upfront costs pay off in our state to reduce climate change impacts and air pollution from diesel. We would like to see transit agencies included in the heavy-duty omnibus rule in the proposed clean truck rules. And we urge DEQ to adopt the innovative clean transit rule plan to be passed in California next year in tandem to gradually transition our transit agencies to 100% zero emission vehicles. Thank you for the time and ability to testify.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair George. The next name in my speakers list is Ramphis Giantinovittorio.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair George, Vice Chair Barrasso, and members of the EQC. My name is Ramphis Giantinovittorio, and I'm with Blue Green Alliance. We're a national organization founded between the United Steelworkers and the Sierra Club, aimed to address our environmental challenges while creating good quality jobs. We fundamentally believe that those two things are not mutually exclusive, but they can go hand in hand. I'm testifying today in support of the advanced clean truck rule and the low NOx rule for the potential of creating good quality, high road jobs, reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, and helping provide and improve health outcomes for frontline communities. We believe, I also want to testify in support on the low threshold for the fleet reporting rule, as we believe that it will ensure good, robust data and help understand what our current existing fleet needs are, as well as helping understand what the business operations and models look like, as it helps us inform future incentives and for ways for us to further incentivize electric vehicles on the road. Understanding this is very critical and important to ensure that workers misclassified as independent contractors are not burdened by the transition to a cleaner, decarbonized transportation system. Independent contractors, again, historically been seen in the trucking industry, are generally women and people of color and vulnerable workers. So again, we're going to support any policy that helps flesh or raise awareness about what those business operations look like, and also ensure that by understanding that we ensure that our policies help support and actually allow truckers to be compliant with future legislation, with our air quality goals and standards. Again, I'll conclude and say that we again support the rules as drafted, and will continue to support policies that ensure that installation of infrastructure is done by a skilled and trained workforce, and that will continue to promote domestic manufacturing where possible. Thank you very much, and I'll submit written comments to support today's testimony. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you, Chair George. We did have one additional person raise their hand to present comment. And that speaker is Kathy Moyd.
Yeah, I had not originally planned on testifying because I was concerned about adopting these rules without California's rules being finalized. But after hearing all the testimony, I wish to say I think you should adopt them now. But I noticed in your preamble to your rules that you ask for help in becoming consistent with the California rules. And I'm not sure how to do that, but I definitely recommend that that's something you should be able to do so you don't have to keep coming back every time California changes their rules. And I don't know why my video didn't work.
Well, thank you. Anyhow, we got your words. That was what was probably most important.
Thank you, Chair George. At this time, there are no other raised hands or requests to speak for public comment that I can see on my participants panel here.
Okay, well, again, thank you to all the speakers, everybody who took time out of their busy lives to share with us their thoughts about the work that we're doing today. It is very important to our work and to DEQs to hear from the people of Oregon and what it is that they want to see done. So we are scheduled to have a morning break after our public forum before we get into our action items for the day. Unless folks feel otherwise, I would say let's go ahead and take that break and maybe reconvene at 10:40. Does that sound good to everyone? Great. All right. So we will take a little break. See you all back here at 10:40.
And thank you, Chair George. This is Stephanie Caldera, Commission Assistant. I will pause the recording while you are on break, and there will be a note on screen saying you will reconvene at 10:40. Thank you.
All right. Our next item on the agenda is an action item, and this is the landfill methane rules. So I will turn it over to the team for their presentation. Welcome.
Thank you, Chair George, Commissioners. Good morning. For the record, my name is Ali Mirzakhalili. I'm the Air Quality Division Administrator here with my team, Michael Orman and Heather Kopomaki, to walk you through this next action item, and here available to answer any questions that you may have. In the interest of time, I'm just going to step aside and turn it over to Michael. Go ahead.
Thanks, Ellie. Chair George, Commissioners, my name is Michael Orman, and I serve as the Air Quality Planning Section Manager for DEQ. With me today is Heather Kopomaki, the lead Senior Air Quality Engineer, who will provide an overview of the proposed landfill methane rules and the process DEQ used to develop those proposed rules. The landfill methane rulemaking is part of DEQ's response to Executive Order 20-04, directing state agencies to take actions to reduce and regulate greenhouse gas emissions. And the proposed rules meet that call to action regarding greenhouse gas emissions from landfills. I want to make sure and acknowledge the many stakeholders that participated in the development of these proposed rules. We received valuable feedback throughout the rule development process that helped form the proposed rules we bring to you today. Thank you for your time and participation throughout this process. And now I'll pass the mic to Heather to provide an overview of the proposed rules, the process we went through to develop those rules, and ultimately our recommendation to the Commission.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you, Ali. Also, thank you, Chair George and Commissioners. My name is Heather Kopomaki. I am a Senior Air Quality Engineer with the Air Quality Planning Program at DEQ. I am pleased to present to you our landfill gas emission rulemaking work and the results and recommendations from that work. Next slide, please. So just starting with a brief overview of how our presentation is organized. I'm going to start with a really short background on landfills, landfill gas, and sort of why we started this rulemaking. And then I'll go through the rulemaking process that we did. We had an original proposal for the rules that we put onto public notice. I'm going to discuss that, and then the public input we received. And we did make some modifications to those proposed rules based on the input. So I'm going to discuss those modifications and why we did those. And then finally, I'll open up for any questions that aren't asked during the presentation, and I'll go through our recommended actions to the commission. Next slide, please. This slide shows a typical cross-section of a larger municipal solid waste landfill. There are a lot of elements in this slide that aren't directly related to landfill gas, but I think it shows the complexity of landfills. Just to sort of start off, there are two main types of landfills that are included in this rulemaking. The first is municipal solid waste landfill. This is where your typical household and commercial waste goes. The second type is non-municipal solid waste landfill, or sometimes called industrial waste landfills. And these are landfills that take specific types of waste, such as construction and demolition waste or wood waste from wood products facilities. Some facilities have private landfills on their property that take waste only from their on-site processes. And landfill gas, which is the focus of this rulemaking, is generated during the decomposition of waste inside the landfill. And if the landfill generates enough landfill gas, the landfill installs a landfill gas collection and control system to manage the gas. And those sort of vertical and horizontal lines you see there are what is typically part of the landfill gas control system. Those would be wells installed into the waste. So next slide, please. And this graph shows the typical composition of landfill gas for a municipal solid waste landfill. For industrial waste landfills, the gas composition can vary. It can vary a lot depending on the type of waste. But for the standard municipal solid waste landfills, you can see methane is about 50% of the landfill gas. And the other 40 to 60% is carbon dioxide and a mixture of other constituents. As you likely know, methane is a potent greenhouse gas. Over a 100-year time span, its global warming potential is about 25 times that of carbon dioxide. However, if you look at just a 20-year time span, methane's global warming potential is over 80 times that of carbon dioxide. So this shows why landfill gas control is an important element in greenhouse gas emissions reductions. Next slide, please. The next two slides, I'm going to look at landfill gas emissions, specifically in Oregon. This graph shows the carbon dioxide equivalent emissions from landfills in Oregon since 1990. This data is from DEQ's greenhouse gas reporting program and reflects data reported from the largest landfills in Oregon. As you can see, the emissions tend to range between 1 and 1.5 million metric tons of carbon dioxide emissions per year in the years that are on this graph. Next slide, please. Looking a little bit more fine-tuned at the stationary sources, reporting process emissions in Oregon. In 2019, landfills were approximately 37% of the carbon dioxide equivalent emissions in Oregon. This shows landfill gas is a significant component of the overall greenhouse gas emissions in Oregon. So next slide, please. So as I've shown in the previous slides, landfills emit greenhouse gases in a significant amount in Oregon. Reduction of these emissions now and in the future in order to slow the impacts of climate change is one objective of this rulemaking. In 2020, Governor Brown signed Executive Order 2004. The order directs a number of state agencies, including the Environmental Quality Commission and DEQ, to take a variety of actions within existing authorities to reduce emissions. Elements DEQ and EQC are working on include the Clean Fuels Program, the Climate Protection Program, food waste reduction, and landfill gas emissions. And the last one is this rulemaking. I'm going to go over specific parts of the executive order that pertain to this rulemaking in the next slide. So next slide, please. Here I've highlighted two passages from the executive order that really framed our rulemaking. I'm going to simply read these passages out loud. The first one says, agencies shall exercise any and all authority and discretion vested in them by law to help facilitate Oregon's achievement of the greenhouse gas emissions reductions goals set forth in this executive order. And the second passage is, the EQC and DEQ shall take actions necessary to reduce methane gas emissions from landfills as defined in ORS 459-005(14) that are aligned with the most stringent standards and requirements for reducing methane gas emissions from landfills adopted among the states having a boundary with Oregon. Next slide, please. This map shows the landfills in Oregon that could potentially be impacted by the proposed rules. These are the landfills that are currently permitted by DEQ's materials management program. The size of the dots on this map represent the amount of waste currently in the landfills. The amount of waste has a large impact on the amount of gas generated from a landfill and is therefore one important threshold included in the proposed rules. I also just want to note that currently 12 out of all the landfills shown have an air contaminant discharge permit or Title V permit. Next slide, please. So I've laid out some background on landfills and why DEQ initiated this rulemaking. I'm going to move on to discussing the process that we went through. I'm going to start with the big picture and kind of step through the elements in more detail as I go through the presentation. DEQ convened a rulemaking advisory committee that met 3 times to discuss the rulemaking. The third meeting also served as our fiscal advisory committee meeting and had the same committee members. The public notice started in late June, went through most of July. We held a public hearing on the proposed rules in late July. Next slide, please. Our advisory committee members consisted of individuals with a wide variety of interests, including local municipalities, public health and environmental advocates, technical experts, and industry personnel. The advisory committee members provided great input throughout the rulemaking process, especially during the fiscal advisory committee meeting. And I'd like to thank all of them again. During the fiscal advisory committee meeting specifically, there was a lot of discussion on the actual fiscal impacts to small businesses and all other communities within Oregon. So DEQ gave the committee an additional month after the fiscal advisory committee meeting to provide additional data on these potential fiscal impacts. DEQ used this data to update the fiscal impact statement for the public notice. Next slide, please. In this slide, I'm going to start looking at how the proposed rules were drafted. I'm going to start on that light teal box on the lower left and kind of go clockwise through the various elements. Consistent with the executive order, DEQ reviewed the landfill gas emission rules from neighboring states. We found California to have the most stringent rules. So we started with those. Currently, Oregon implements the federal landfill gas emission rules. These are the 3 elements along the top, the green, orange, and maybe darker teal color boxes. To stay consistent and ensure EPA concurrence with the proposed rules, we incorporated federal requirements that were either not addressed in the California rules or that we found were more protective. And then finally, based on input from internal experts as well as advisory committee members, we incorporated some Oregon-specific modifications and additions to the rules that were within our authority to help facilitate Oregon's greenhouse gas emissions reduction goals. We also provided some modifications to the rules to make implementation easier for both DEQ staff and landfill owners. I'll discuss this compilation a bit more in the next few slides. Next slide, please. This table shows the first step in the rule compilation process, which included looking at the current landfill gas emission rules in Oregon, which, as I stated previously, are the federal rules, and California's rules. Some of the major differences that we found are California's rules include both municipal solid waste as well as those non-municipal solid waste landfills, and they exempted construction and demolition waste landfills, while the current Oregon rules only affect the municipal solid waste landfills. And California rules included much smaller landfills. They had much tighter surface emission monitoring requirements and had a higher gas destruction requirements. In the landfill size, in the row that shows the landfill size, I include two sets of units. This is intentional. The federal rules and the California rules both use a megagrams unit for weight. As one of our initial methods to simplify the rules, we chose to use tons instead, since this is a unit that most landfills track their waste in. So it's just one simplifying modification we made. The federal and California rules include thresholds with increased levels of requirements. We included similar thresholds in our proposed rulemaking. These thresholds start with the landfill size. Once that size is exceeded, the site must calculate an estimated gas generation rate. Once that gas generation rate is exceeded, the site must start surface emission monitoring. And if the monitoring shows an exceedance of the surface emission monitoring allowances, the site must then install and start operating a landfill gas collection and control system. These thresholds are important in the permitting requirements that are discussed in a little bit. So next slide, please. Here I present some of the largest Oregon-specific modifications and additions to the rules that we made. I like to focus mostly on the waste in place amount. While reviewing the rules, we wanted to check the thresholds used in California rules to see if we wanted to use the same ones. And while we're looking at the waste in place, we looked at the minimum amount of waste that would be needed to potentially exceed the gas generation threshold and require surface monitoring and potentially a gas control system. We found that amount to be quite a bit lower than the California threshold. And so we lowered the threshold for waste in place to be in line with that calculated value, and that value is 200,000 tons. You'll see that in future slides. We also chose a different value for the gas generation rate. Instead of the BTU per hour rate used by California, we went with a much simpler tons per year rate. The rates are equivalent, but this is just another simplifying modification we made to the rules and allow us to use spreadsheets and tracking systems that are already in place in our greenhouse gas reporting system. We also included continued surface monitoring after the gas control system has been closed. This is just to track how that affects the landfill gas. And we included construction and demolition waste in the regulated landfills. Next slide, please. Here we see major elements of the current or the proposed rules that went on to public notice. I've highlighted where we made those Oregon specific changes. I've already discussed those changes where we included the construction and demolition waste landfills. We lowered that waste in place threshold and we used a different but equivalent to California gas generation rate. As I said, this is a summary of the key aspects of the rules that went on in public notice. And there were some changes made to this proposal based on public input, and I will discuss those in a little bit. Next slide, please. I think I see a hand up.
Sorry, I missed that. Vice Chair Barroso.
Thank you, Chair George. Heather, I appreciate this and I appreciate the comparisons of the, and I don't, tell me if you're going to get to this in the next slide. Are we going to get to see a side-by-side comparison of Oregon's proposed rules to California's current rules?
Commissioner, I do not have that specifically in a slide.
And so maybe, and so generally, if my recall, they look similar. Can you just point to where there are differences, maybe as we've got this slide up on Oregon's proposed rules?
Yeah, the main differences are the differences that are in those highlighted cells. And so we started with the California, and the highlight is sort of where we made changes. None of the changes we made to based on the federal requirements really made it to this level where it was in this slide. So the changes are the California exempted construction and demolition waste landfills, and we chose to keep those in the rules. And then California had a much higher sort of landfill size threshold, the waste in place threshold, and we're proposing a lower threshold, and then also changing the gas generation rate sort of units.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for that clarification.
You're welcome. So we propose to enforce our rules through our permitting authority. So this slide shows the originally proposed thresholds, basic requirements of each of those thresholds, the proposed permit type that we would use, and the estimated number of new permits. So these thresholds I've discussed a little bit prior. The first one is that waste in place threshold of having less than 200,000 tons. And we propose those would be on a basic permit. And we propose landfills that exceeded that 200,000 tons of waste in place, but had a calculated methane generation rate below 664 tons per year. Those would be on a simple, and we estimate there would be 7 new permits from that. And then after you exceed the methane generation rate, then you go on to surface emission monitoring. And then if you exceed the 200 ppmv methane level from surface emission monitoring, you would be required to install a gas control system. It's really hard to estimate which one of the landfills would fit in either of those. So we kind of lump them together and estimate there'd be about 8 new permits that would be in either of those, and they would all be under standards. And there are 12 existing permits that are not included in this table. There would be some additional requirements from these rules, but it wouldn't really change the permit type. And this is a broad summary of what went out on the public notice. And then I'm going to start talking about the comments that we received and the changes that we made in response to those public comments. So next slide, please. Overall, we had I thought a very nice public comment period between the written and the oral comments. We had 20 commenters with about 88 individual comments, and we lumped those into 18 general categories. I'm not going to go through all those categories. They are spelled out in the staff report starting on page 30. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, we received some great public comments on the rules, and I want to discuss some changes that we made based on the public input. I think the largest change and the most important change that we made was addressing the potential burden on rural communities and small landfills from that requirement for the smallest landfills, those landfills with less than 200,000 tons waste in place, to get a basic air contaminant discharge permit. The purpose of the basic ACDP was to track the amount of waste in place in the landfill. It was not requiring any specific controls on the landfill. So we spoke with our colleagues in the DEQ's materials management program and found that they require waste received reports from the landfills every year. And since we're already receiving that information, we determined that we could actually remove this requirement and instead incorporated best practices from these landfills so that they would not have to get this permit. Most of the remaining changes for clarity or to align clearer with the federal requirements. This includes controls for windy sites, providing substantial time to install and operate a required gas control system, and some details on monitoring requirements. Next slide, please. This slide is an update to the permitting slide that I showed previously. The yellow cells are where we made changes based on the public comment, and this shows no longer requiring those basic ACDPs for the smallest landfill. And so that's about 24 landfills that will no longer, the rules no longer required to get a permit. Next slide, please. And here's a map that I showed you previously. I just wanted to bring this back up because this, now you understand why I have that 0 to 200,000 tons size on the size of the circles. So the smallest ones would no longer be required to obtain a permit, and we'll be tracking them using data from DEQ's materials management program. Next slide, please. As we've been drafting the rules, we've been thinking about implementation if the rules were to be adopted. We have a near-term timeline, and that timeline is to get our internal processes in place by next October, when the permit applications would be due by rule. We plan to also do an annual report to track how well the rules are functioning. And in 5 years, we would use these annual reports to do the thorough 5-year review of the rules and see if we can find places where they are working and where they could use some improvements. To help with the short-term permitting goal, we plan to put together guidance documents for landfill owners with new or updated requirements. And we'll send this out with information requests that'll help us determine which landfills may need which sorts of permits and what kind of additional guidance they may need. We are coordinating with other DEQ programs to use existing data and systems where we can. And if adopted, DEQ will ask EPA to agree that these rules are at least as stringent as those 3 federal rules I discussed earlier, so that we can have one comprehensive rule on landfill gas emissions for Oregon. For the first step, DEQ would present to EQC again in November to update the landfill state plan. Next slide, please. So at this point, I'd like to address any additional questions that the commission may have before I present DEQ's recommendation to EQC.
Do we have any other questions or comments? Vice Chair Barrasso.
This is just a comment that I just, I know that it's not, I appreciate you all looking across your programs and connecting with the materials management folks and finding that path where you're able to reduce that burden for some of the smallest landfill operators. That just, it's good to know that can happen. And I think that's an important thing to speak to, because it is, it's always that in our efforts to make sure that we have a clean environment, it's finding a way to make these things easier is great. So I just want to show my appreciation for you all and working across sort of teams within the department to do that. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
But then maybe while I have it, but I'm otherwise excited and happy to see this here. I'm glad this is coming here.
Chair George, I believe you're on mute.
Thank you. Well, I got that out of the way for the day, so thanks. It looks like not seeing any of the questions or comments that we may be ready for our motion.
I'll read that now. DEQ recommends that the Environmental Quality Commission adopt the proposed new rules for Division 239, adopt the proposed revised rules in Division 12, and adopt the proposed revised Table 1 of Division 216, all listing in Attachment A of the staff report for this item as part of Chapter 340 of the Oregon Administrative Rules.
All right. Do we have a motion to this effect?
So moved. Commissioner, would you like me to go, Chair, would you like me to read that motion? I'm happy to do so.
Why don't we, just for the record? Thank you.
Great. I move that the Environmental Quality Commission adopt the proposed new rules for Division 239, adopt the proposed revised rules in Division 12, and adopt the proposed revised Table 1 of Division 216, all seen in Attachment A of this report as part of Chapter 340 of the Oregon Administrative Rules.
Do we have a second?
This is Commissioner Kyle. I second it.
Motion's made and seconded. Do we require any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes. Thank you very much. Well, we are a little bit ahead of schedule, which is never a bad thing. Director Whitman, are we ready for our next agenda item?
Chair George, I am not sure because I am doing this particular item along with Jimena Cruz Cuevas, and let me just see if she's here. She is not, does not appear to be here yet.
Oh, I'm here.
You are.
There she is.
Great. Why don't we go ahead then? I think we are ready.
Wonderful. Well, welcome, and we will turn it over to you.
All right. And Chair George, I'm going to kick this off and then hand it over to Jimena to talk through most of the detail of this work. But let me start out by saying that this attention on environmental justice as part of our DEQ Everyday's work is really an important concept, and one that has a lot of energy behind it. A lot of interest and commitment from staff, and also really supported by things going on at the national level. So I'm going to actually start out by talking a little bit about, just to set the frame for talking about justice at DEQ, by talking about what's going on at the federal level, and a little bit about what's has gone on in our state legislature also around environmental justice. If I could get the next slide, please. All right, so first of all, at the federal level, in the Biden administration, one of the very first steps that President Biden took was to issue an executive order on the climate crisis. And that executive order includes important substantive provisions around incorporating environmental justice into decision-making by a specific set of federal agencies. That executive order also creates the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Committee, which is intended to really pull together that set of federal agencies, along with significant participation from community organizations and interest across the nation. And that is really the coordinating, it's an all of government approach to environmental justice that the Biden administration is taking, really asking a whole set of federal agencies to consider how their actions, proposed actions, and to some degree past actions have created burdens on environmental justice communities. Another important aspect of the Biden administration prioritization of environmental justice is the Justice 40 initiative, which you may have read about. And that identifies a set of 21 priority programs where those programs are going to be taking steps to advance environmental justice. But more fundamentally, it commits the Biden administration to allocating at least 40% of federal funding that is spent and federal investments that are made on climate, energy, and infrastructure to overburdened and marginalized communities across the nation. So this is a really significant commitment by the Biden administration, and we look forward to working with the Federal Environmental Protection Agency as well as other federal agencies to implement all those initiatives. And we are seeing some early signs of additional resources in the president's budget for environmental justice work also that implements this. And there are also some significant proposed investments related to the infrastructure packages being negotiated in Congress right now. So at the same time that all of that is going on at the federal level, also here in Oregon, there has been renewed interest in energy around environmental justice. Oregon was a relatively early leader in work on environmental justice, starting in 2007 under Governor Kulongoski. Senate Bill 420 was passed, which established the Oregon Environmental Justice Task Force. And that task force continues to this day. And we, along with other natural resource agencies, work on a regular ongoing basis with the Environmental Justice Task Force. Your commission assistant, Stephanie Caldera, is our key staff point of contact with the Environmental Justice Task Force, and Nina DiConcini, our Northwest Region Administrator, also regularly attends the EJ Task Force meetings, as I do from time to time as well when I can. So One of the challenges with the Environmental Justice Task Force has been lack of resources. The task force is a volunteer body. It has no staff. Agencies are directed to assist the task force, but it has no dedicated staff person. And typically it has gotten a little bit of staffing out of the Oregon Governor's Office. I did that work when I was the governor's natural resource policy advisor, but I know from firsthand experience, it's frustrating to everybody that we're asking volunteers to spend significant time on the task force and then not providing the resources to really follow through on some of what the task force would like to do. So recognizing that issue, Governor Brown introduced Senate Bill 286 in the 2021 legislative session. And we talked about this with the commission earlier. This is the bill that would have renamed the Environmental Justice Task Force as the Environmental Justice Council, made some minor changes in the membership of it, but most importantly, would have provided significant resources for the task force / council. And those resources would have been in the form of staff and funding via DEQ. So that bill did pass out of committee, its initial committee with a do pass recommendation, and was sent to the Ways and Means Committee, where the Ways and Means Committee failed to act on the bill before the end of session. The bill did get another hearing in a policy committee, very favorable. A lot of community advocates and representatives came and testified in favor of the bill, but ultimately it did not pass the legislature. We have not given up on this, and when I say we, I mean I can't speak directly for Governor Brown on this, but I know that she continues to be interested in at least this concept of providing permanent resources for this work in state government. There were, so more to come. We haven't given up. The message I want to send is we haven't given up on 286, and we are having some conversations with legislators about the short session, and as well as also thinking about that in the long session. And the point being, not so much this is a DEQ thing. It's important for the work, kind of regardless of where it lives, that there be resourcing for this important work. Several good things did happen at the state level in the last legislative session around environmental justice. However, it wasn't all disappointing news. So first of all, SCR 17 was passed by the state Senate. That's the Senate Concurrent Resolution 17 that established an environmental justice framework for state natural resource agencies when making policy decisions. And this is a framework for how agencies decide where investments are going, particularly with regard to clean air and clean water. It also establishes the principle of assuring that there's engagement and participation from environmental justice communities in decision making. So that SCR is, sets forth the state Senate's principles around these issues. We still could use the provisions in 286, which are the binding legislation, which included provisions around analysis of disparate impacts and environmental burden on environmental justice communities. So that's SCR 17. House Bill 2021 is the 100% clean legislation that you've all read about and heard about. That's very exciting, that commits Oregon and Oregon electric utilities to getting to 100% clean electric generation by 2040 with an 80% target by 2030. That bill also creates a $50 million fund administered by the Oregon Department of Energy to work with communities to develop community scale renewable electric generation, providing clean energy to those communities and also helping those communities be more resilient in terms of having a dependable supply of electricity. So Oregon DEQ does have a role with House Bill 2021 in terms of supplying the information about greenhouse gas emissions from electric generation that drives the work of the Oregon Public Utilities Commission in terms of regulating our electric utilities to assure that they're planning for and meeting those targets. But the main roles are Oregon Public Utilities Commission and then Department of Energy. So we are and have been, and even earlier this week, talking with at a leadership level with the Public Utilities Commission to make sure our work on climate is coordinated with the Public Utilities Commission work on 100% clean electricity, and that we both are coordinated with the Oregon Department of Energy on our approaches to environmental justice and are being intentional about things like how do we define environmental justice communities, and as much as possible being consistent. So there's a fair amount going on behind the scenes on that. And that work will be helpful if we are successful with something like Senate Bill 286 in a future legislative session. It will help set a foundation for that. And then finally, I also just want to briefly mention House Bill 2165. That passed in the 2021 session also, and that legislation eliminated the sunset on the clean vehicle rebate program. It also doubled the rebate for lower income households. And you'll recall the rulemaking that we did. We've done a number of rulemakings on that program, and there's another one coming to you in November. You're going to have a temporary rulemaking to implement the provisions of 2165. But really exciting part of this is it doubled the rebate for lower income households from $2,500 to $5,000 for clean vehicles. And to put a pin on that, we have some really exciting news to announce in terms of our clean vehicle program here in Oregon. We are now #2 in the nation for the percentage of plug-in hybrid and battery electric vehicles sold in new vehicles sold in state. In the first 6 months of 2021, we hit over 6%. We're #2 behind California, and we've taken kind of a big jump in that percentage. 6% is a lot, and we're seeing that percentage really start to accelerate. And this is before implementing this new rebate, which will go into effect at the beginning of 2022. So I bring that up because particularly I'm very proud of Oregon's Clean Vehicle Rebate Program, particularly the component that's focused on low-income households and environmental justice communities. And Oregon's really leading the nation in how it's targeting its program to lower-income households. And there's a lot of work there to do with environmental justice communities and organizations to assure that we're being effective in getting these significant incentives out the door for clean vehicles. And a reminder that this includes both new and also used vehicles, which is a growing part of the market for clean vehicles. And obviously in terms of affordability for lower income households is going to be really important. So going forward, you're going to hear from Jimena about great work that is going on across the agency in our environmental justice work group. And I really want to, at this point, just turn it over to her to talk about the great work that they're doing. And then I'll wrap it up with a few thoughts about next steps. But let me just pause before I do hand it off and see if you've got any questions. Okay. I will get out of the way then. And Jimena, take it away.
Thank you for that introduction, and good morning, Chair George and members of the Commission. My name is Jimena Cruz Cuevas, and I'm here to present to you on behalf of the Environmental Justice Work Group at DEQ. This group consists of members across all regions, media, and a variety of job classifications throughout the agency. Next slide, please. The EJ work group is made up of 60 members representing management and staff across all media. The catalyst to this group's formation was in late 2020 when D-Pay Wu included environmental justice in a regional haze analysis. To expand on this effort, members of the R users group, including air, land, and water, analyzed DEQ data along EPA's EJ screen data to answer the question, are environmental burdens unevenly distributed among communities in our state? And if yes, what key variables are associated with those patterns? From the analysis, we learned that people of color are disproportionately impacted by environmental burdens. The burdens experienced by urban and rural populations need to be considered separately. Programs that are voluntary in nature pose barriers to participation, and there were gaps in how and where data was located. The analysis was presented at the American Geophysical Union Conference and subsequently to some program section meetings at DEQ. This began an internal discussion about how we should address the disparate impacts on populations, and we began to think about how we could create something agency-wide rather than program-specific. We saw a need to develop a collective understanding of what environmental justice means at DEQ in consultation with communities and consistent with state directives. A foundational set of analytical methods and best practices to assess environmental burdens, and communication channels with communities and agencies to create a framework centering around well-being and incorporating dimensions of health, climate resilience, environmental equity, socioeconomic equity, and racial justice. Through word of mouth, a larger group at DEQ formed to move forward the momentum we had harnessed. Our first meeting was set up in April of 2021 to discuss how we should further environmental justice. In July, we began work on a charter that would encompass the goals we wanted to accomplish in the first stage of this work. After several revisions, we have come close to completing a charter and laying the foundation for our work. Resourcing this effort remains a challenge, and we are looking at creative ways to leverage internal resources as well as grant opportunities to fund this work. Additionally, we will be researching and developing our understanding on how to address the obstacles and methodological challenges we expect to encounter. We hope to present these findings at the American Geophysical Union Conference later this year. Next slide, please. To set the foundation for this work, we had to start at the fundamentals. The concept of environmental justice varies by who you ask and the medium or program you are looking at. There are also multiple different definitions of environmental justice that highlight different factors depending on which agency, entity, or legislation you look at. In order to build a comprehensive framework for DEQ, we must look at past and current efforts to understand what people at DEQ feel EJ is, and we also need a system in place to take input from the communities we serve. The framework must link across media, the EJ task force, and the needs of the community. The graphic on the screen shows the group members' response to what EJ means to them, and a few keywords stood out. Accountability. Not only do we need to do the work to implement EJ principles, we also need to have a way to hold ourselves accountable to the communities we serve. Partnership. One obstacle that is ever present in our work is the siloing of information. Rather than gatekeeping issues in one area or program, we need to build partnerships agency-wide, cross-agency, and with communities and beyond. We do not just need to do this work, we need to excel in this work. We must go beyond checking a box because it is required and enter this work with the compassion and attentiveness that communities deserve. Next slide, please. To address the challenges of developing a common understanding of EJ at DEQ and of sharing best practices, we decided to look internally at where EJ principles have been used, and we created a list of projects throughout the agency and across all media. Some examples include the Leaking Underground Storage Tank Backlog project in land quality, which is tasked with reducing the backlog of open lust sites. The EPA set a goal of closing approximately 16.5% of sites annually. And in deciding how to prioritize sites, two criteria were used: the areas with the highest levels of contamination according to UST scores and the areas with vulnerable populations. In air quality, diesel emission mitigation grants are prioritizing reductions of diesel emissions in areas of the state with the highest diesel emissions, vulnerable populations, and population density. And materials management. The program has started to take into account diverse stakeholders who may be applying by adding questions like checkbox if you live or your project will serve an economically distressed region as defined by Oregon business. In addition to other questions about community partnerships, values, and training opportunities for their staff, they also increased outreach to help answer questions. The projects highlighted here represent specific efforts that are not the standard for the program as a whole. These efforts on their own are showing that environmental justice is something we have the ability to do and incorporate into our programs, but most importantly, they highlight the need for a more structured effort. Each of these examples used a different set of variables for defining vulnerable populations, and there is no standard of what constitutes a vulnerable population. Different programs use different data sets when making their analysis and do not communicate that across media. There is also a lack of education on environmental justice and what it means, and as a result, pushback could be experienced along the way from those who are not on the same page as the efforts of the rest of the group. And lastly, the implementation of EJ work is dependent on the project manager themselves deciding whether or not they would like to take that approach. Next slide, please. For this work, it is imperative to build capacity and engagement with communities and to honor their lived experiences to inform this work. We will do this by addressing the technical, educational, and communication needs around environmental justice. The technical group will focus on building skills and capacity necessary for a disproportionate environmental burden analysis for all agency programs within DEQ as well as for external agencies. The team has already begun gathering data across media and are looking to identify data gaps, assess how to consider cumulative impacts, build methodology, and develop an environmental burden index. This group is already collaborating with the Department of Administrative Services-led efforts and the Oregon Health Authority and Population Research Center at PSU to develop an Oregon-specific health index. The education team will take the lead in instilling environmental justice into DEQ's work. This group will develop best practices for DEQ's program through research and engagement. And they will also collaborate with internal and external partners to learn about the past successes and opportunities to engage communities. And the communications group will develop synergistic relationships for EJ implementation across DEQ and other state and local governments and non-governmental organizations and communities. They will facilitate collaboration as to not duplicate work and will follow best practices using recommendations from the education team. This group will also provide a point of contact for the public and track grant opportunities. This structure serves as a starting point to build the foundation and infrastructure needed for this work to be successful. We approach this EJ work with an open mind and willingness to adapt based on new information and community feedback. There will be many phases to complete this work, and we will track lessons learned and successes along the way. Next slide, please. Instilling EJ as a lens in all the work DEQ does is no small effort. We will run into many obstacles as we develop a common understanding of EJ and begin building relationships with our communities. DEQ will have to focus on breaking the silos that are currently present in the way we function, because we need to go beyond putting nice words under government headers and move into action. At the moment, we have outlined the first set of priorities to address within our charter, and we will keep building and gaining momentum to create EJ as a consistent commonality in our work. As we move forward and we hit more barriers along the way, we will look to you for support. Thank you very much, and I'll pass it back to Richard.
Thank you, Jimena. Before I pick it back up, any questions from the commission for Jimena on the pieces that she just presented?
Well, I'd just like to personally thank Jimena for her presentation and for sharing how thoroughly and well your work group is looking at these issues, and for your leadership on this critically important issue. Again, it's a wonderful thing to see such a kind of grassroots effort really being embraced by our people within the agency, because that is absolutely what is necessary for this important work to move forward. I'll just share that there's so many good things that you talked about. In particular, I really appreciated your mentioning of how important accountability is going to be, that we have to be able to demonstrate that we are actually following through on these ambitious goals that we are laying out, and that we're going to have to be accountable for our words. We don't want these things to be just words. We don't want these things to be goals. We want to demonstrate that we're making progress. So I particularly appreciate that. And I appreciate also what you had to say about looking at the differences across media and how, it's a large, complex organization, and those different silos, as you said, often look at these issues very differently. And then also that there's a particular role for leadership commitment, and that this can't just be, a few managers are particularly interested in this and others aren't. We really do need to move so that we have commitment across the departments to be working on these issues and seeing how it touches the work of all our departments. So I just wanted to share that in your excellent presentation, those are a few things that I really appreciated. You and the group particularly noting, and then Vice Chair Barrasso.
Likewise, thank you, Jimena, for just walking us through this, and certainly your leadership. It's beautiful to see so many people within the agency engaging in this work. I mean, when I heard that number, that's impressive, and it's both time, but it's just, I know that this has been in many different flavors. There's been interest here, so I'm glad to see this coming together in this way and to see the leadership. I've just got a couple. I'm excited to see this unfold and to help from this position to help support you all and make sure that momentum maintains, because it is hard work to take this through the agency and bring it to life. And so I know that we're here. And I'm excited also because of the fact that DEQ sits in a central place as a natural resource agency with the information that it holds to be a leader amongst all of our, a leader and a supporter for this work for our other partner natural resource agencies. So I just have one question though, which is I wonder how this is playing in, because now we have updated census data, which will inevitably form a foundation for a lot of the information that I know goes into this. I don't know if folks are as excited as I am about that, but I'd love to hear if people are starting to talk about what that means and how folks can use that.
Yeah, we try to use the best available data that we have on hand. So we know that there's a lot of barriers with the new census data that came out with how the data was collected, and we are going to be aware of that. But yeah, we are going to be seeking the best available data.
Okay, Commissioner Kyle.
Thank you. I just want to echo my fellow commissioners' appreciation for this work. The fact that this was done, it sounds like as an add-on rather than an integrated piece of work is a little bit troubling, because the environmental justice aspects is so important, and the work that you did is a huge potential to uplift the agency. And it really, the analysis that you did was not trivial to try to identify those communities. So I think there's tremendous value in this work, and I would like to see it more integrated into the agency and into policies and education and outreach activities as much as possible. And you're really going to be leading the way. This is somewhat new work, and I just really want to emphasize that I'm behind you because it really does illustrate the maps and everything else that you did in your presentations. Shows the communities that are disproportionately impacted by pollution and therefore are unduly bearing the health burden from this. So it really underscores the public health aspects of the agency, and I think that's just so important. So I really appreciate the work of this group.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. And also your point about the critical importance of funding important work. And we know that DEQ has been an advocate for this work and has supported it all the way and heightened its importance in our messaging. And at the same time, I think it's important to say out loud that, if you value it, you fund it, you resource it. If you're really committed to it, you don't ask people to add on to what are incredibly busy, overburdened schedules and volunteer for something like that. You invest in it because it's critically important to the success of your mission. And so, Jimena, please share with the team that we at the EQC certainly do believe that it is a critically important part of DEQ's message. And we will continue to work with department leadership to say just that and to advocate for this work to be appropriately resourced. That is the way we move forward. And so we admire the work that you were doing in the meantime. It is setting the foundation for where we need to go. And at the same time, we will use whatever opportunities we have to share that this is one of the most critical investments that we can be making if we really want to meet with success. So thank you again so much. What a great presentation. This is exciting work. So thank you, Director. And please give the team just really, please share with them how excited we are about this work and that we really look forward to hearing about it as it moves forward.
Thank you for that. That means a lot. And I will share your message with the rest of the group.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Jimena. And Jimena is the spokesperson for this amazing group of people who are doing this work. There's a large group behind her, but she personally has been devoting so much time and effort to this. Along with others, but she's really gone above and beyond. So I just want to recognize that. I have a few more slides, Chair George, on this that I want to talk about. So a number of people mentioned resourcing. And obviously we were very disappointed by the fact that Senate Bill 286 didn't pass. And as I've already said, we are going to be working to make sure that the Environmental Justice Task Force is appropriately resourced, and also the work around collection of data and analytical tools for using those data and to identify disparate burdens at the community level, at community scale. That work is going on to some degree at the Oregon Health Authority and the Department of Administrative Services already. And as Jimena indicated, our technical subgroup of the Environmental Justice Work Group is linked to that work that's going on. They're looking at socioeconomic data, at health data, And we're trying to make sure that they have the data around emissions and pollution that is needed to really round this out. There are other agencies that have an interest in this also. The Department of Transportation, as it evaluates environmental impacts of transportation projects, has an interest in this work. Department of Land Conservation and Development has an interest in this work. And then Oregon Housing and Community Services, particularly with the significant investments that the Oregon legislature is now making in supporting affordable housing and housing for the houseless in our communities, also has a real interest in this work and in these tools. So we still could use more formal legislative support for that effort, but we are cobbling together the resources that we can to really give us enough to get started on this. And in terms of cobbling together resources, I will also want to make sure you are aware that I have committed to the Environmental Justice Work Group that we are going to create a limited duration, which means not necessarily permanent position within DEQ to support the work of the Environmental Justice Work Group and also help link that effort with the other agencies that we've talked about here. As you saw in Jimena's presentation, there is environmental justice work going on already as part of the regular work of DEQ, but it is in project, it's at the project level, it is siloed. And so connecting the people who are working on those projects and thinking about that work in a cross-program, cross-media way is the piece that's really missing, that the work group is helping solve. And we look forward to continuing to work to fill that space. We also are looking for opportunities for funding from the federal administration. As I mentioned, there's at least one opportunity that has popped up recently that we are going to be pursuing. And then as we work on future efforts around our DEQ's agency request budget for 2023 to 2025, this is certainly an area where we'll be paying attention to resource needs in this area. And then finally, and we've got Deputy Director Felden here, as we work on the agency strategic plan. That is obviously a place where we want to incorporate environmental justice into the agency strategic plan as we develop that and bring it together along with diversity, equity, and inclusion. So a lot going on, a lot of excitement about this work in the agency, and a lot of need also for this work. And so if I could get the next slide, please. I want to kind of close on that. I presented these 10 strategies to you yesterday in the context of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And this is the statewide diversity, equity, and inclusion plan. And I mentioned kind of in passing that there were links in this plan to environmental justice. And I want to call those out and talk about them just a little bit here this morning, and specifically in the context of environmental justice. One of the pillars of environmental justice is community engagement. It is involving all of the communities that we are affecting with our work, in our work, and allowing those communities access to information that allows them to play a meaningful role with us in shaping decisions and policy and implementation in ways that avoid creating further disproportionate burdens on communities, particularly for communities that historically have suffered those burdens. You know, our communities with BIPOC households in particular, but also tribal communities and at least to some degree in Oregon are rural communities. We can't do that work effectively unless we have the information to know what are the burdens that have been placed on those communities and what the effects of our future actions, whether that be new policy or program implementation, what those effects are at a community scale. And, you know, I've worked in this field both on the community development side and the environmental side for a long time, multiple decades. And this is an issue that is not new to me. The issue of a lot of our programs and policies are designed at a higher geographic scale that misses the effects that we have at a community scale. And in my view, we are not doing our job that we say we are doing as protectors of public health, as you know, DEQ's mission to be a leader in protecting our air quality, our water quality, and our land quality. Well, that sounds nice, but unless we are looking at that at a scale of individual communities that really allows us to understand those impacts at a community scale, we're so often missing harm that has been and that can be even in the future imposed on those communities. So this is a really exciting movement for me to see the attention this is getting at the national and state level. And I'm very proud of the staff at DEQ who have really are bringing a new energy to this work that we haven't seen for a long time. It's been ignored for too long. And I am committed to working with staff and working with the commission to really have DEQ be a leader in this area. And it's very rewarding to me to see these things brought together in terms of community scale and the environmental mission of the agency. And it fits exactly with this statewide action plan around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so just to round out that picture, we can do that. We can bring those things together most effectively if we have a workforce and we have leadership in the agency that understands those communities, that is more diverse, that has lived experience so that we can relate to and understand those communities as we work with them. So that should not be viewed as a threat to existing staff or managers or leadership in the agency. It's part of where we're going as a society anyway. It is part of where we are going as an agency anyway. It's a good thing. And for all of us to learn about this and learn about that experience makes us so much more effective in our work. So again, I'm very excited by this. I'm very appreciative of the leadership of the work group and look forward to continuing this work in the coming years.
Thank you for that, Director. Any other questions or comments? Well, I'll just comment briefly, or maybe just share a conversation that Richard, you and I have had on a couple occasions before. Again, it comes full circle to the how important it is for the state and for the legislature to step up and support these goals, because many of those communities that you're talking about, how critical it is to really reach out to them and empower them to have a voice in the decisions that impact them and that have impacted them. And of course, you know, and one of the fundamental reasons that we have these environmental justice disparities is because very often these communities, they do not have a lot of resources themselves. You know, they do not have policy analysts that can sit around and review regulation changes or policy changes and get paid to come to meetings and provide comments. So that's why it is going to be particularly important that to engage those communities, we're gonna need, you know, to empower folks to work with them and to really reach out and not to just kind of be, you know, passive and hope people can do the reaching out on their own. And I know you understand this, so but it just kind of, it feeds that same system, and why it's going to be so crucial for us to invest in this work if we wish to be successful in it. So again, just exciting work and the right direction for the work of the department. Anyone else with other, yes, go ahead, Director.
Thank you, Chair George, for that. And just to put a pin in that, and I didn't say this in my remarks, so I want to say it now. Building capacity for this work within DEQ is great and wonderful and necessary work, but we also need to build capacity in the communities that we work with. And this is a point that I, at every opportunity, try to make with our federal agencies and partners, and we'll continue to make also with the legislature, that it's not only about state agencies. It has, in order for this to be true engagement, we need to build capacity at the community level also. And the need at the community level is actually even greater than it is, you know, at state agencies that get public funding. So I look forward to working with community partners, local government, and others who recognize that. And you know, government is starting to invest bits and pieces in some of that community capacity, but we've got a lot more work to do there also.
Good, thank you. All right, a fantastic presentation. We look forward to hearing more. But at this point, we probably better move on to the director's report. So back to you, Director Whitman.
Thank you, Chair George. Okay, I'm going to shift gears and provide the director's report to you. And sorry, I'm just doing a time check to see kind of where we are here. Okay.
We are pretty close to on schedule.
Okay, so I've got about 45 minutes. Well, I want to talk to you about a couple of things that are not in the written director's report first. And first of all, I want to talk a little bit just to acknowledge that, like all large organizations right now, DEQ is dealing with our COVID pandemic. And so just point of information, work at the agency continues to be almost entirely remote. You see me in my office, but that is really pretty rare. You know, particularly with the Delta variant, I would say the numbers of folks working in the office is down even further, and people are being pretty careful. Obviously, I'm in my office without a mask because I've got my door shut, but in our office space, if we're here in the office, we are masked as required by Oregon Health Authority rules. As part of state government, we are also part of the governor's vaccine requirement, and that requirement requires all state workers to be vaccinated, fully vaccinated by October 18. We do have recent agreements with the major public employee unions for state government that provide a little bit more time for vaccination. But we are, what I want to say here is we are seeing high levels of vaccination among DEQ employees and managers. And we've talked a little bit among leadership that this is it's a sign of the science culture at DEQ, and at least in my personal opinion. And so I know some agencies are concerned about conflict and about potential resignations and potentially personnel actions related to this. You know, we may have some of that also, but so far things are looking pretty good for DEQ in that regard. And we'll have, you know, certainly more information for you as we get closer to the deadline for action on that. We are not going to have our doors open for the public until now January 1 and I would say at the earliest. That is the target date that Governor Brown has set for state agencies now that we're in this space of dealing with the Delta variant and the higher levels that we've seen in Oregon. We are continuing at the leadership level to talk about the future of work at the agency and how remote work certainly will be a much bigger part of that future. But we continue to not want to move too quickly to say that we've got answers, given the what we've seen over the last year and a half of this pandemic. So we are going to be doing more engagement with our managers to get feedback from them about their ideas about remote work. We're also going to be doing more engagement with our labor union and with employees generally around these issues before we go further in terms of trying to plan for what the future of work at the agency may be. I will say other agencies are also doing the same work, and at this point there is no real statewide across the board direction that all agencies need to do this the same way. We are approaching it from a perspective of looking both at what's the business need for DEQ and other agencies and what's the reality of the workforce now that we've been in this for a year and a half. And I think people's expectations for what work looks like have changed very dramatically. And so we're trying to be cognizant and respectful of that also. So more to come. I wanted you to know that we are thinking about those issues and doing some work, but the work right now is really more listening to people, listening to our managers and staff about where they're at. Any questions about that before I go on?
No.
Okay. I want to talk about some changes that are occurring in our leadership structure and leadership at the agency also. So first of all, some very exciting news. We have hired a permanent Eastern Region administrator, Shannon Davis. Shannon, some of you have all seen Shannon before. She's been the manager for our materials management program here in headquarters. Shannon has background working for EPA Region 9, and then before that for Arizona's Department of Environmental Quality. She's run line programs before, and I think she's very excited to actually be returning to kind of the nitty-gritty of program implementation in the Eastern region. And Shannon also comes from a background, her family has a lot of background in actually Eastern Washington. And so she understands that culture of that part of the state. And I think she's going to be dynamite as the Eastern Region Administrator. I want to shout out to Leah Feldon, who led the recruitment for that. We had a strong pool, very strong pool of finalists for the position. And it was a hard decision, but Shannon just really shone, and really excited to have her coming on. Leah, do you want to say anything more about that?
Not really. I think he covered it well, Director Whitman. Just to also express my excitement. I think Shannon is going to be great, as Director Whitman said, and she's really excited to be coming into the role. We've really appreciated Lori being the interim in the role for the last year, and I think Shannon's also going to bring a lot to the leadership team into this position as a member of the leadership team. So really, when we're recruiting for an administrator role like that, it's really to ensure that the person is going to be the best person to lead that division, but also, what are they going to add to our leadership team? And Shannon is certainly going to add to our leadership team with her background and important work that she's engaged in right now, including around DEI. So we're looking forward to having her on that team as well. Thanks.
Thanks, Leah. And then I have some sad news also, which is Lori, as Leah mentioned, Lori Annan has been the interim Eastern Region Administrator for over a year now, and Linda Hayes Gorman was the prior permanent Eastern Region Administrator. Lori has announced that she is leaving DEQ effective in a few weeks, and so I brought Lori on. I hired Lori as our implementation administrator, and really created that position because I felt there was a need for work around better integration between our headquarters functions and our regions. And Lori has done an enormous amount of work with managers and administrators and staff to strengthen those relationships and to really create a culture of coordination, collaboration between headquarters and our regions over the last several years. And there are a number of specific projects that Lori has led that have institutionalized that. We never did get funding from the legislature for that position. And so it has been a drag on the agency's budget here ever since it was created. We did try to get it funded permanently. But I think more fundamentally in evaluating what to do, Leah and I have really come to the conclusion that the agency is in a much better position in terms of coordination between headquarters and our regions at this point than it was 4 or 5 years ago. Part of that is Lori's work. Part of that, though, also is, I think, a clear expectation from leadership in the agency that that's how we roll. We expect that level of coordination and collaboration between headquarters and the regions, and that has been carried forward by our media administrators, Ali Mirzakhalili in air, Justin Green in water, and Lydia Emer in land, in terms of their interaction with the regional, each of the regional administrators, and then down at the manager level. So that part of the agency is functioning much more smoothly than it was certainly when I first came on here as director. So we are going to close that chapter on DEQ's history and kind of go back to the structure that existed before, but still very much with that expectation about coordination and collaboration. Relatedly, we also are making a few changes to our the structure of some of the groups that we use to lead the agency. We have a leadership team in the agency, and that group is not changing. It's up with Shannon coming on and Lori going off. We also have had a group that has had the media administrators and the regional administrators meeting on a regular basis to discuss policy coordination and to some degree implementation coordination issues between the different media divisions. That group is going to continue. It's renamed, and its new name is EPIC, for Environmental Policy and Implementation Coordination Team. That's a mouthful. And both Leah and I are active members of that coordination team. So to give you a flavor of the types of things that that team does, the rulemaking agenda for the commission, which for a long time, the rulemaking agenda was kind of set by each division without really thinking about what was the overall package of stuff coming to the commission. Well, we've changed that. And part of that is also talking with you regularly about what's on the plate and what's the sequence of things coming to the commission. So that's where that sort of coordination will occur. And then finally, there is a third group, which is really focused on operations and the almost day-to-day issues, like what are we doing with the latest COVID directive? Or, what are we doing with a wildfire crisis, or those sorts of things. And that's a smaller team that is made up of myself and Leah, Brian Bowling from Central Services. It has a media administrator representative on it and a regional administrator representative on it, and they will rotate every couple of years. But it's really that group is meeting more frequently and just dealing with the short-term decision-making in the agency. So again, this is just for your information. And it's not, this is tweaks to our current structure. It's not a major change, but I don't have a lot of opportunity to talk to you all about what's going on in terms of agency operations. And this was significant enough that I thought, along with the change in Eastern Region Administrator and Lorian leaving the agency, just wanted to tell you about what's going on. So any questions on that before I go on into the rest of the director's report? Okay. I'm just going to proceed then. And I am going to talk a little bit about some of the things that are in the written director's report here. First of all, for the laboratory, the first item in the written director's report is a note about the sampling for harmful algal blooms related to Ross Island. And I checked this morning. I was trying to see whether the Oregon Health Authority advisory is still in place. I believe it is for Ross Island. And we had some very, very high levels of, I think it's microcystin in water samples at the level of really an order of magnitude above levels that we were seeing that are kind of the normal trigger for health advisories. But I want to note, we've also had HABs health advisories for Detroit Lake, which, if you'll recall, were related to the shutdown of the city of Salem's drinking water supply. This advisory did not relate to the city of Salem's drinking water. Although there was a recreational advisory in the lake, we did not see levels of microcystin and the other constituents in either the intake water for the city of Salem or in the finished water, but certainly keeping an eye on it as part of our systems. But in addition to Detroit Lake, Upper Klamath Lake and virtually all of the upper part of Klamath River also had HABs advisories. Also Coos Bay, and I don't recall there ever having been a HABs advisory for Coos Bay before. But so the point I want to make is we were seeing the breadth of health advisories for harmful algal blooms, recreational, seems to be higher this year than we've seen before. And that may be related to the third thing that you see in the director's report for the lab, which is, we've seen spikes, particularly of nitrates in water, kind of across the board in Western Oregon in particular. And there's some thinking that this may be related to runoff from the Labor Day fires last year, just because of the widespread nature of it. And obviously combined with the very high temperatures and heat crisis that we had earlier this summer. Those two things together is likely a trigger for a lot of this, but a bad year for HABs. Also, for the lab is starting along, again, working with the Oregon Health Authority on sampling for PFAS compounds in public water systems around the state, really starting here more in the northern Willamette Valley area, but then eventually moving to other parts of the state. This is a big issue nationally. PFAS is of concern, and it comes primarily from flame retardants and material that's used in firefighting foam, but also in some consumer products. And we are also part of a group of states that are working with EPA around PFAS issues and potentially additional federal regulation around PFAS. So more to come on that. We should be starting to see sampling results, I believe, later this year on that effort. Okay, moving to the air quality division. First, you just heard in the public forum a lot of testimony about the advanced clean trucks and low NOx rules. Today is the last day, as I understand it, for the comment period, public comment period on that rulemaking. That's part of why I think you were hearing that testimony. Those rules are expected, proposed rules are expected to come to you for a decision at the November EQC meeting, along with several other rules coming from the air quality division that I'm going to talk about now. One is a temporary rulemaking on the changes to the Clean Vehicle Rebate Program, House Bill 2165 that I just talked about. That statute goes into effect at the beginning of 2022, and there was not time to do a permanent rulemaking. So we're having to do our drill of a temporary rulemaking followed by a permanent rulemaking later in 2022. So you'll see temporary rules come before you at the November EQC meeting. Also in the air division on regional haze, we were expecting to bring that to the commission also in November, but we had a request for additional time for the comment period, and that has bumped that rulemaking into early 2022. So this is the final state implementation plan provisions around regional haze. Okay. If there are no questions, I'm going to move on to the land quality division. Just a note, yeah.
Sorry, Vice Chair Barrasso.
I think just as I've been thinking and just hearing everything, as regional haze is coming to us, whether it's in briefings, Richard, or whether it's part of that, it would be great to understand sort of just some of that overlap between both regional, what is the overlapping regulations and how that's playing out between regional haze, Clean Air Oregon, and Clean Air Oregon, I guess in particular, but certainly I know that's going to span with the climate protection program as well. So I know we've been talking about each of these elements separately, and it would be something that that can happen I mean, we're coming together to talk about a lot of those programs anyway, so that could happen in a briefing, but that's something I would like to see.
Okay, thank you, Vice Chair Barrasso. And I want to reassure you, and actually anybody who's listening out there in the public, that the programs are talking regularly and also meeting with Leah Feldman and myself regularly to talk about coordination between these related programs, the climate protection program, the regional haze, the rulemaking that's going on related to Cleaner Air Oregon. We are making sure that everybody is talking to each other and that we're coordinating in policy and programmatic terms, but between what we're doing in each of the three. But we'll talk with you in more detail about that. Yep. Okay. So land quality division. Just a note on the I'm a Bad Apple campaign in materials management. We talk so much about regulations, and regulations are a lot of what comes before the commission. People forget that DEQ does a lot of non-regulatory work, and materials management is one of the prime examples of that. And the governor's executive order on climate tasks DEQ's materials management program with developing a plan to further reduce beyond what we've already accomplished, which is significant, but further reduce food waste in Oregon. And food waste is an important issue for a number of reasons. First of all, just in terms of hunger, making sure as much as we can that food actually is used and gets to people who need it. And a lot of the work that the materials management program does is with organizations like the Oregon Food Bank to reduce food waste by capturing some of that food that would otherwise be wasted and getting it to people and households that need it. And but this campaign, I'm a Bad Apple campaign, is about the main way in which food goes to waste in our households is by getting spoiled. And some of that has to do with packaging, some of that has to do with other things, but this campaign is an educational effort to help households with some techniques on how to reduce food waste. And it's part of implementing the governor's executive order on climate, because hunger is one of the reasons this is important, but another reason is one of a large source of food waste is from food that is never consumed, and the energy that goes into producing and transporting and preserving that food is wasted if it's not consumed. So to the extent we can cut down on food waste, it's one of the most effective ways we can cut down on greenhouse gas emissions. So an important program. Also in materials management, I mentioned the planning that the program is doing to help reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Another aspect of that is planning a strategic plan around the built environment. And so the materials management program is putting together a plan on how to reduce consumption-based greenhouse gas emissions from our building and construction industry, and other strategies for reducing greenhouse gas emissions from our residential and commercial structures. So this is work that links to work that our building codes agency does, that our Department of Land Conservation and Development does. It's an important part of our overall greenhouse gas reduction work. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about what's going on in the regions. So Eastern region, I've already told you about the new Eastern region administrator. Portland General Electric's Carty facility and the associated Boardman power plant. If you all will recall, the Boardman coal plant shut down last year, but the Carty generating station next to it is a natural gas-fired power plant that continues to operate. The air quality permit for those facilities has been combined, essentially, so that there's one permit that covered both Boardman and Carty. And so we are going back out on public notice for some modifications to the Carty air permit. And one of those, the first modification is to pull the Boardman coal plant piece out of that permit and have that permit be just Carty. The second change in that air permit is a result of some revised information that was provided by the manufacturer of the turbine for Carty about emissions associated with startup and shutdown of Carty. And so those changes are proposed to be incorporated into the air quality permit. This does not involve an increase in proposed hours of operation or pollution levels otherwise from Carty, but it is to more accurately reflect the most current information we have from Portland General and from the manufacturer of the turbine. This permit has been controversial. This is the second time we've gone out on public notice on it, and I'm sure we'll get a lot of comments about it again.
Just quickly, Richard, a question on that, and I'll go back to the report and check it. So you mentioned no increase in emissions. I thought there were a greater amount of VOCs associated with this startup, and it's that startup and shutdown process that I think overall makes it run differently than when it's just running continuously. But I can go back to the report as well.
You're correct, Chair George. There is an increase in there is a proposed increase in VOCs. There's a reduction in the other emission limits for the facility.
Okay. And so then is there any additional mitigation for that or management that can be done? I know that's probably not something we generally want to see.
It's my understanding that staff have analyzed whether or not there are any public health impacts as a result of that change in the VOC emissions. And it's my understanding that we don't believe that there are. But I'll look to Deputy Director Feldman if you've got anything to add on that.
I don't. That's my same understanding.
Yeah.
Okay, so at this time, at least, there's no proposal for additional controls for that additional VOC emissions.
No.
Correct.
Okay. The next thing I want to talk about a little bit is the Hell's Canyon litigation settlement. Just to note, this is actually a fairly big deal. So what this relates to is the water quality certification for Idaho Power's Hell's Canyon complex. The hydroelectric facilities in the Snake River Canyon that Idaho Power operates, that generates a significant amount of hydroelectric power, but also which has cut off access for salmonids in the Columbia and Snake to the Snake and Snake tributaries above the complex. And the state of Oregon worked with Idaho Power and others, including the state of Idaho and the Nez Perce tribe. I believe the Umatilla tribes, also the Burns Paiute, on these issues. And we finally reached a settlement with Idaho Power back several years ago, where Idaho Power agreed to a number of things to improve habitat for salmonids above the complex, but not to be required to reintroduce salmonids by providing any form of passage above the complex. In other words, we're laying the groundwork for eventual reintroduction, but we're not requiring that yet. So that was the settlement. A number of tribes and environmental groups objected and filed litigation over the settlement. And this is the settlement. This is a settlement of that litigation. The settlement really focuses on a slightly different issue, which is mercury contamination, particularly downstream of the Hells Canyon complex, and which has been an issue. It's particularly an issue for resident fish, and in particular for sturgeon. And the Nez Perce tribe Oregon has a health advisory for mercury around sturgeon and other resident fish, and the Nez Perce tribe shut down its tribal fishery for sturgeon some time ago, actually, because of concerns about mercury contamination. So Oregon has agreed with the Nez Perce tribe and the other plaintiffs to work with the state of Idaho and Idaho Power to develop a mercury TMDL for the Snake that will address the sources of mercury that are leading to the fishery closures. And the objective of this agreement is to create a plan and strategies to reduce mercury levels to a point where eventually that fishery can be reestablished. But it's going to be, this is a long haul. Sturgeon are very long-lived, and mercury accumulates over long periods of time. So this is a multiple decades effort, but we got to start somewhere. And again, the overall goal here is to get that fishery healthy again and get it reestablished for everyone, including the tribal fisheries. So, Oregon, and including Oregon DEQ, is contributing resources to that TMDL, along with Idaho Power, along with, I believe, with US EPA. And we hope to have that TMDL done here. It's going to take several years to do, but we're pre-meetings to do some of the design work for the TMDL have already started.
Well,
Okay.
pleased to hear that that's going to move forward. So thank you, much needed.
In the Northwest region, I don't think we've really had a chance to talk with you as a group about Bradford Island, but this is also a really big deal. This is a major success for the Pacific Northwest. So Bradford Island is the pool immediately behind and above Bonneville Dam in the impoundment there. And again, very much like what I just talked about, There are tribal fisheries, including usual and accustomed platforms, locations. They're all along this pool. This pool was unfortunately a location where the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers had a landfill that was used during the construction of Bonneville Dam and even after construction, where a lot of debris and equipment was disposed of, including a bunch of which got into the river. And the levels of PCB contamination in resident fish, not salmon, but resident fish in that pool are among, if not the highest levels of PCB contamination that we see in fisheries anywhere in the Pacific Northwest, including higher than the Portland Harbor Superfund location, the Duwamish up in Puget Sound, just very concerning levels, and particularly knowing that those fisheries are active there. Again, there are health advisories out, but we know that tribal fishers who are catching resident fish may be consuming those. So this has been a top priority for the Yakima Nation and other tribes, as well as Washington Ecology, as well as Oregon DEQ. And we put together a coordinated, concerted effort pushing on EPA under the prior administration to list this site as a federal Superfund site. We have been working directly with the Corps for, I think, almost 20 years now to try to get this taken care of. There was one cleanup effort which did not succeed in reducing the levels of contamination. So we pushed under the prior administration. That effort was rejected. And then with the current federal administration, we renewed that effort, and we have been successful. And I need to be a little careful, because what we were successful in getting is a proposed listing of Bradford Island as a Superfund site under the federal Superfund program. It still needs to go through some more process before that decision is finalized, but this will provide federal EPA oversight of the Army Corps of Engineers efforts to clean up the site, and the states will have active roles along with the tribes as in working with EPA and the Corps to get this done. But it's good to again see a longstanding environmental problem like this finally get the attention it really deserves. Okay. Also in Northwest region, I'm gonna just briefly note, kind of in the interest of time here, we've got a lot going on with the Owens Brockway glass plant in North Portland, including EPA enforcement action, DEQ enforcement action, Cleaner Air Oregon work around air toxics, and also work with regional haze. The upshot of all of this is, I believe, well, the enforcement actions are going to continue on, and they're going to go wherever they go. But I do think we are going to see operational changes in the facility finally that reduce risk to the neighboring community. I'm a little hesitant to say more than that right now, because we're still in process and of working out exactly what those might look like. But Leah, anything you want to add related to this item? No, okay.
Sorry, mute button issues there. Thanks, Director. No, I would just say, as you can see in the director's report, it's it's a good example of what Vice Chair Barrasso brought up earlier in terms of where these programs have overlap, and for some facilities they do, and we'll certainly bring more information on the overlap that these programs have. But I would just say for the moment that on the one hand, of course, it may be that certain facilities need to look at their emissions from different perspectives for different programs. On the other hand, it can be an opportunity when we look at all of these things together and see some of the co-benefits that can come from emissions reductions and where those satisfy and bring emissions to acceptable levels for different programs. And so what the department is trying to do in this case, and certainly will be in others, is seeing where can we benefit from looking holistically at this so that a facility may take the opportunity to install controls or upgrades that will satisfy multiple programs at once, rather than doing this multiple times or in different ways at different times.
Thank you, Leah. Okay, I'll close out talking about Northwest Region by talking a little bit about Zenith Energy, which has been in the news also the last couple of months. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on Zenith. There is some possibility Zenith may come before you all in an appeal of an administrative hearing, so just be aware of that. So here's what's transpired with Zenith. We required Zenith to submit an updated land use compatibility statement in connection with a renewal of its air permit. We did that because we observed that there were significant changes in the operation of the facility over time, in terms of the volume of material going through it and also the type of material going through it. What that means is Zenith had to go to the city of Portland and get a determination from the city of Portland about whether the facility is compatible with the city's acknowledged comprehensive plan and land use regulations. And the city in, was it late August or early September, made a decision, and they made a decision that the facility is not compatible. So it was a negative land use compatibility statement. Under your rules, when there is a negative land use compatibility statement in the AIR program, we are required to propose to deny the air permit. And so that's what we have done. And Zenith has filed an administrative appeal of that action. I believe Zenith also has filed an appeal of the city's land use compatibility statement with the Oregon Land Use Board of Appeals, which is the normal route for appeal of a land use decision. So this is, this is just the latest chapter, if you will, related to Zenith. In the meantime, Zenith can continue to operate, and as these processes get carried out and these review bodies make decisions about whether the decisions that were made are correct or not. And that'll be, again, both the Oregon Land Use Board of Appeals and then the Oregon Office of Administrative Hearings, Administrative Law Judge will review DEQ's decision. That decision of the Administrative Law Judge can also get appealed. And so that's where the appeal would come to you all from the administrative law judge, if we get to that point. So I think given the pending, at least pending litigation, I don't really want to say more than that at this point, but hopefully that gives you a little bit of a picture of what's gone on.
Commissioner Kyle.
I just have kind of a clarification question for that. Since this is a new situation, at least for me as a commissioner, the commissioner role on this would only be if this becomes a contested case.
Thank you, Commissioner Kyle. It will be a contested case before the administrative law judge. And again, if there's an appeal from the contested case, that's when it would come to you.
Thank you.
Okay. I think unless there are questions, I'm going to wrap it there in terms of the director's report. There is this handout about board and commission member compensation, but I would propose that we discuss that as part of the commissioner reports and commission update business.
Deputy Director.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair George. Richard, we do have the update on chemical waste management. I don't see that made it to the written report. I think we should do a quick verbal on that if you're okay with that.
I am just fine with it. Deputy Director Felden, why don't you go ahead?
Sure. So commissioners, this is back to our Eastern region updates, and just a quick update on the chemical waste management facility that you're aware of, our hazardous waste landfill and facility in Arlington, Oregon. So you've heard some updates previously about chemical waste management's priority to seek a permit modification for a new hazardous waste landfill unit on the same property, but another cell on that same property to handle contaminated soil from cleanup and Superfund sites. That is essentially on hold for the moment. So they are looking to the county, which is Gilliam County, to rezone a location for that proposed landfill. So they need to get the rezoning and the land use authorization before any request for permit modification for that can come to DEQ. In the meantime, another of their priorities that has sort of taken first place, if you will, is they submitted a modification request to the department. I believe it was just Monday of this week. And that modification, sort of a lesser big deal, but that modification is for a new additional storage area within the footprint of the existing property that they have there. And in short, the additional storage space is for material that is to be sent for incineration. The chemical waste management facility itself does not have an incinerator, and we don't have an incinerator in Oregon for hazardous waste, but they do collect and transship incinerator bound waste to other facilities. There happens to be a bit of a nationwide shortage of incineration capacity going on right now. There are only, I believe the number is 6. I think that's accurate, 6 hazardous waste incinerators of this sort of capacity that we're talking about in the country. So there's a need generally that EPA is aware of as well and has talked to the states about for some more storage space before the waste can be incinerated. So we received what is considered a Class 2 permit modification for this storage area on Monday of this week. And the process is then that we issue a public notice, which we did yesterday. It's a 60-day public notice. So we will be accepting comment on that storage area through November 30. And there will be a public hearing virtually on October 21st, but mostly wanted to make you aware of that. Not that the storage area is as big of a deal, but that I don't want confusion out there, and because they've been working on the plans for the additional cell and are now moving forward with the storage area. These are separate things. And that's all I have.
Any questions or comments on that? All right, it sounds like that was the conclusion of the director's report. All right, our last item for our general session today is, yeah, we are afternoon now, is just our commissioner reports. So commissioners, if you have anything you'd like to share since the last time we've all gotten together, now would be a great time. Commissioner Kyle.
Yeah, I'll share some news from OWEB since I'm the liaison there. The biggest news probably is that Mita, who was the executive director, has moved on, and she's now the supervisor for the Mount Hood National Forest. And there's now a new executive director named Lisa Hansen. She had a meeting with OWEB, actually, with the staff yesterday, so that was my first time getting to know her a little bit. She comes from ODA and has a really strong farming and agricultural background and life, with a lot of experience in food production and processing. So it's going to be a process of establishing a new relationship with the ED, and I look forward to working with Lisa. The other update from OWEB is that their staff are reviewing the relevant sections of the draft non-point source management plan, and they're going to be responding with any comments to the DEQ staff. So those are the two things that are kind of on the front center there. And that's all I have to share.
Great, thank you. Vice Chair Barrasso?
I think in my the only update I have in my work role over at the City of Portland earlier this week, and I hope over time this will connect with some of the work within the climate protection program, or at least provide some examples of things we can look to, albeit in a very different context. But we did just release a $60 million request for proposals for climate projects within the community. So that's just I think it'll connect over time as we sort of get to the other end of review or those proposals and get to see projects on the ground. I think it's in many ways many of what I suspect will a lot of the community climate investments may have a lot of comparisons there. So that's all I have for folks otherwise.
That's very exciting. Are those projects all to occur within like the city boundaries of Portland?
That is correct. That is correct.
That's great. That's a lot of resources to jumpstart good work.
It is. We're excited about it.
Absolutely. Great. Well, I think, let's see, probably the only thing I have to share is that not long ago, maybe a week and a half, interestingly, the 9 tribes of Oregon sent a joint letter to Governor Brown. And having worked in tribal government for over 20 years now, I can say that, the tribes, just like any other government system, states, counties, municipalities, they all have their own unique point of views. And so when the 9 tribes of Oregon come together and agree on something and say, yes, I'm going to put my name on that, put my seal on it, I can say it's an unusual occurrence. But I was very glad that they did that about this. And in a way, this letter is a reaction or a response or a request for engagement, I think would actually be most accurate, around the issues that the governor and the associated state agencies who are working on the governor's or Oregon's 100-year water vision are taking on. And it's just kind of a response to that from a tribal lens. And so it it wants to engage in that process, and it wants to inform that process and participate in it. But it's also just taking a tribal perspective on what it means for Oregon to have a 100-year water vision. And it was interesting to watch the tribes work on that together and see what they chose to put in that letter. One of the comments that is in there is we've seen a lot of state planning processes come and go. And we know that unless, healthy, clean rivers that can support people and fisheries are at the heart of it, that it will be another plan that comes and goes, essentially. And so it will be very interesting to see how they respond to that. It was also shared with all the primary agencies who are going to be working on these issues. And of course, DEQ is one of those several agencies. So specifically, there was a request to form a state tribal water task force and to engage in these issues as they relate to the 100-year water plan. So it'll be very interesting to see what the reaction to that is. But I thought that was very interesting and might in some way interact with DEQ's work. And then the other thing I always just mentioned, just one of so many Oregonians this summer, getting out on our waters, which is a wonderful thing to do, right? One of the things Oregonians love to do is get out and recreate on our waters. We talked earlier today about some of the ways that those uses become impaired from different types of pollution. So getting my sons out on the Deschutes and getting them kayaking and seeing how many people really that this is just a core part of what they do. They do it with their families, seeing young people, old people, people fishing. I know it's good for me personally, but I think it also helps me remember when we are talking about cyanobacteria and a lot of technical things that we have to talk about here. It always helps to keep it very real, to see those little kids and those dogs and those elders and people fishing. That's really what all these TMDLs and water quality standards are about. It's about Oregonians and their use and value for our waters. So I just thought I would mention that. And I think that's my report for this meeting.
Thank you, Chair George. I don't think we need to spend more than a minute or two on this, but I did provide the commission with a handout that came to us from the governor's office around some legislation that passed in the last session, House Bill 2992, which you should have in your materials, around compensation for board and commission members. So this legislation increases the per diem that is paid to board and commission members for board and commission members that meet criteria around income. And so the intent of this legislation is to encourage participation in state boards and commissions, particularly by people of limited income, by providing some additional compensation. So we'll follow up with each of you, I think, independently to see what you want to do with this, but there is an opportunity for potentially for increased compensation as a result of this statute. And I think that's about all I have to say. I would note that the way the bill is worded, it is compensation for time spent and performance of official duties. So one of the things we need to talk about, just to be transparent for everybody here, is when we have a briefing with you individually, or we ask you to participate on a rules advisory committee, is that part of your official duties? And I haven't asked Oregon DOJ about this, but my feeling that it probably is. And so we'll take this up with each of you individually. And then if there's a need for any group conversation about it, we can bring it back at a future EQC meeting. But I just wanted you to be aware of it.
Yes, thank you, Director. I saw that. And as you say, that additional compensation is available to people who don't exceed certain income guidelines. But I just want to say that I think it's a great thing and it's a good idea. Depending upon your role and depending upon which board or commission you sit on, there can be a very substantial contribution of time to serving on these boards, and we do it to serve the people and the resources of the state of Oregon. But we also appreciate that there's many people who just simply don't have the luxury or the job flexibility to just not be working, or just look at this one meeting we've been here, right, since we got started 12:30 yesterday, 7:30 at night, start again at 9:30, and we'll probably end somewhere around 2. There's just a lot of people who simply are not able to do that. So anything we can do as a state to make it easier for more of our community people to bring their views and their vision and their experience to the table is just something I want to express support for. So thanks for mentioning that here.
Yep.
Anything else for this section of the agenda?
No,
All
Chair.
right then. When we have completed all of the public components of our agenda for this meeting, we will adjourn shortly. We do have an posted executive session that we will be following up with before long. I'm going to actually propose that we give people at least 10 minutes between now and when we reconvene. If that sounds okay to everybody who needs to rejoin the call. Great. All right. Well, with that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Excellent. Do we have anybody opposed to adjourning at this time? Hearing none, we will be adjourned at 1:01, and we will reconvene for our executive session at the appropriate Zoom conference call. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for this meeting of the EQC. Take care, everybody.
And thank you, Chair George. This is Stephanie Caldera, your Commission Assistant. I will now end the recording for the regular meeting as you have adjourned.